The desert sun cast long shadows across the steel behemoths that stood silent in neat rows at the Fort Hood Armored Corps Museum. Each tank represented a chapter in American military history, but for retired Colonel Richard Steele Morgan, the M1A1 Abrams in the far corner was more than history. It was a piece of his soul. Morgan ran his weathered hand along the cannon barrel of the massive war machine, feeling the smooth metal beneath his fingertips. At 62, his once coal-black hair had turned silver, but his posture remained ramrod straight, a testament to his 35 years of military service. His blue eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the tank with practiced precision. "This one saw action at 73 Easting," he said, his deep voice carrying across the cavernous exhibition hall. A group of fresh-faced recruits gathered around him, eyes wide with admiration. They had been told that Colonel Morgan, the legendary tank commander from Desert Storm, would be giving a special tour today. February 26, 1991, the mother of all tank battles. The young soldiers leaned in closer. One of them, barely old enough to drink, raised his hand. "Sir, is it true you took out 12 Iraqi T-72s in less than an hour?" Morgan nodded slowly, memories flooding back. "Eagle Troop, 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment. We were the tip of the spear." He paused, pointing to a spot on the tank's turret. "This girl carried us through a sandstorm so thick you could barely see 50 meters ahead. The Iraqis never knew what hit them." His mind drifted back to that day, the chaos of battle, the radio crackling with urgent commands, the thunder of the 120mm main gun firing again and again, the smell of cordite and diesel fuel, the silent prayers as shells flew in both directions. "We were supposed to be conducting a forward reconnaissance," Morgan continued. "Instead, we stumbled into the Tawakalna division of the Republican Guard. Visibility was near zero in the sandstorm. We had to rely on thermal imaging while they were fighting blind." The young soldiers exchanged glances, trying to imagine the scenario. "That's when I learned the most important lesson of armored warfare," Morgan said, tapping the side of his head. "It's not about who has the biggest gun or the thickest armor. It's about adapting to conditions, using technology to your advantage, and trusting your crew." He stepped back from the tank, surveying the eager faces before him. So young, so untested, just like he had been before the Gulf. "Any other questions?" A female lieutenant with close-cropped hair stepped forward. "Colonel, what about the new threats? Drones, smart missiles, portable anti-tank weapons? How would tanks like these fare today?" Morgan's expression hardened slightly. It was a question he'd been hearing more frequently lately. The question that had brought him out of retirement and back to Fort Hood as a special advisor. "Tanks have been declared obsolete since World War II, he replied evenly. "Yet here we are, over 70 years later, and they're still on the battlefield. Why?" He paused for effect. "Because a tank isn't just a weapon. It's a psychological force. It's mobility, firepower, and protection in one package. And most importantly, it's adaptable." The lieutenant nodded, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "That said," Morgan added, "we need to evolve our tactics. The battlefield is changing. Always has, always will." As the tour concluded and the recruits filtered out, Morgan remained beside the Abrams, lost in thought. From behind him came a familiar voice. "Still sweet-talking your old girlfriend, I see." Morgan turned to find Command Sergeant Major Frank Doc Martinez grinning at him. At 58, Martinez had the weathered look of a career soldier, with laugh lines etched deep around his eyes and a salt and pepper mustache that had been regulation perfect for decades. "Just reminding the kids what these beasts can do," Morgan replied, clasping his old friend's hand firmly. They had served together in Desert Storm, Morgan as tank commander and Martinez as his gunner. Now Martinez worked as the senior technical advisor for the armored training program. "How's civilian life treating you, Steele?" Martinez asked, using Morgan's old call sign. Morgan's smile faded slightly. "It's been quiet." The truth was, retirement had been anything but peaceful. 6 months ago, he had lost Eleanor, his wife of 35 years, to ovarian cancer. Their modest ranch house outside Austin, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt cavernous and empty. Everywhere he looked, he saw Eleanor, in the garden she had lovingly tended, in the kitchen where she had prepared countless meals, in the empty side of their bed. "I'm sorry about Eleanor," Martinez said softly, reading his friend's expression. "She was one of the good ones." Morgan nodded, grateful that Martinez didn't press further. How are things here? I hear you've got some hotshot new commander for the 2-5 Cav. Major Sarah Reynolds, Martinez confirmed. West Point, MIT Graduate School. Brilliant tactical mind, but he hesitated. But what? Let's just say she's part of the new generation. Believes tanks are dinosaurs waiting for the meteor to hit. Morgan frowned. And they put her in charge of an armored battalion? Pentagon wants fresh thinking, Martinez shrugged. Can't blame them entirely. The reports coming out of Eastern Europe aren't pretty. The conflict in Eastern Europe had begun 8 months ago, when separatist forces, backed by a major power, had launched a surprise offensive. American forces, including armored units, had been deployed as part of a NATO response. Initial reports suggested that the traditional advantages of armored warfare were being neutralized by new technologies, particularly sophisticated drone networks and advanced anti-tank systems. Morgan had been following the news closely, especially since his son Michael was deployed there as a tank platoon leader with the 1st Armored Division. Their last video call had been brief and tense, like many of their interactions over the years. Speaking of which, Martinez said, checking his watch, there's a briefing in 20 minutes. Classified update on the situation. General Harris specifically asked if you'd sit in. Morgan raised an eyebrow. Harris wants my input? That's new. Things are getting complicated over there, Martinez replied soberly. They need experienced eyes. As they walked toward the command building, Morgan couldn't shake a feeling of unease. He had been brought back as a consultant, but so far, his role had been largely ceremonial, giving tours, speaking to cadets, reviewing outdated tactical manuals. Why the sudden interest in his opinion? The briefing room was already half full when they arrived. Morgan recognized several high-ranking officers from Fort Hood's command staff, along with some faces from the Pentagon. At the head of the table sat Major General William Harris, Fort Hood's commanding officer, a stern-faced man with a reputation for bluntness. Beside him was a woman in her late 30s with short blonde hair and the intense focus of someone who survived on caffeine and ambition. Based on Martinez's description, Morgan guessed this was Major Sarah Reynolds. Colonel Morgan, General Harris nodded as they entered. Thank you for joining us. Take a seat. Morgan and Martinez found chairs near the back of the room. As they settled in, Morgan noticed Reynolds studying him with undisguised curiosity. He met her gaze evenly until she looked away. Ladies and gentlemen, General Harris began, what you're about to see is classified level 4. No recordings, no notes leave this room. He nodded to a technician who dimmed the lights and activated a large screen at the front of the room. The footage was grainy and shaky, captured from a helmet camera, Morgan guessed. It showed an American M1A2 Abrams tank moving along a rural road, trees flanking both sides. Suddenly, there was a flash from above, followed by an explosion on the tank's top armor. The camera jerked wildly as the operator took cover. When it stabilized again, the tank was burning, black smoke pouring from the open hatch. Morgan leaned forward, his jaw tight. He had seen tanks hit before, had lost friends inside those steel coffins. But this was different. The attack had come from above, the Abrams' most vulnerable point, and with no warning. More footage followed, tanks being struck by invisible assailants, armored columns thrown into chaos by precisely targeted artillery strikes, infantry taking cover as small drones buzzed overhead like mechanical insects. What you're seeing is from last week, General Harris said grimly as the screen went dark. 72 hours of combat operations resulting in the loss of 7 Abrams tanks, 13 Bradley fighting vehicles, and 29 casualties. A heavy silence fell over the room. The enemy has deployed what we're calling drone swarm networks, Reynolds spoke up, her voice clipped and professional. Integrated systems of reconnaissance drones, suicide drones, and artillery spotters, all coordinated through advanced AI. They identify our armored units, target their vulnerabilities, and strike with minimal risk to enemy personnel. She stood and moved to the front of the room, bringing up a digital map on the screen. Traditional tank tactics are proving ineffective against this threat. The Abrams was designed to withstand frontal attacks from other tanks, not precision strikes from above. We need to completely rethink our approach to armored warfare. Morgan watched her carefully. There was no denying her intelligence, but there was something in her tone, a barely concealed eagerness to declare the tank obsolete, that troubled him. What do you propose, Major? He asked. Reynolds turned to face him, a shift away from heavy armor toward dispersed autonomous platforms, smaller, faster vehicles with drone capabilities of their own, less reliance on human operators in the kill zone. You're talking about removing soldiers from the battlefield entirely? Morgan's skepticism was evident. I'm talking about keeping them alive, Colonel, Reynolds replied coolly. The age of the main battle tank dominating the battlefield is over. This isn't 1991 anymore. The barb was deliberate, and Morgan felt a flicker of annoyance. Before he could respond, General Harris intervened. No one's making policy decisions today, he said firmly. This is an information briefing. Major Reynolds has been tasked with developing countermeasures against these drone networks. Colonel Morgan has been asked to consult based on his extensive experience. Harris turned to Morgan. The Pentagon wants your assessment, Colonel. Can tanks still be effective in this environment? And if so, how do we adapt? All eyes in the room turned to Morgan. He stood slowly, moving to the screen and rewinding the footage to show one of the tank attacks. The fundamental principles of armored warfare haven't changed, he began. Mobility, firepower, protection. What's changed is how we implement them. He froze the image on a frame showing the drone just before impact. This isn't a strategic failure, it's a tactical one. We're fighting the last war instead of the current one. He turned to face the room. Tanks have always had vulnerabilities. In World War II, it was the bazooka. In Vietnam, it was mines. In the Gulf, it was IEDs. Each time we adapted. We can adapt to drones, too. Reynolds crossed her arms. With all due respect, Colonel, these aren't improvised explosives planted by insurgents. These are sophisticated networks that can identify, target, and destroy our most advanced armor within minutes. Every system has weaknesses, Morgan countered. These drones rely on thermal and visual acquisition. They communicate on frequencies that can be disrupted. They have limited flight times. We need to exploit those weaknesses while enhancing our strengths. That sounds great in theory, Reynolds said skeptically. But in practice, the door to the briefing room burst open, interrupting her. A young lieutenant rushed in, his face pale. He whispered urgently to General Harris, whose expression darkened. This briefing is suspended, Harris announced, standing abruptly. Colonel Morgan, please remain. Everyone else dismissed. As the room cleared, Morgan felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. Harris waited until only Morgan and Martinez remained before speaking again. Richard, he said, using Morgan's first name for the first time in years. There's been an incident involving the 1st Armored. The world seemed to tilt beneath Morgan's feet. Michael? Harris nodded grimly. His platoon was ambushed near Krasnik, multiple drone strikes followed by artillery. They took heavy casualties. Morgan's voice was barely audible. Is he? He's alive, Harris assured him quickly, but wounded, critical condition. They're evacuating him to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. Morgan closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself against the sudden surge of relief and fear. When he opened them again, his gaze was steel. I need to go there. Harris nodded. I anticipated that. There's a military transport leaving for Ramstein Air Base in 3 hours. You can be on it. He paused. There's something else. The Pentagon wants a first-hand assessment of what's happening on the ground. The drone tactics being used there might eventually be employed against us elsewhere. They need someone who understands tank warfare at a fundamental level. Morgan understood immediately. You want me to do more than visit my son? You'd be temporary special advisor to the 1st Armored Division, Harris confirmed. Evaluate the situation, develop countermeasures, report directly to EUCOM. You'd have broad authority but no command responsibilities. Under normal circumstances, Morgan would have resented being used this way. But these weren't normal circumstances. This was a chance to be near Michael, to perhaps make a difference in the conflict that had nearly taken his son's life. I'll do it, he said firmly. I'm going too, Martinez interjected. Both Morgan and Harris looked at him in surprise. You'll need a technical expert, the sergeant major explained. Someone who knows the Abrams inside and out. Besides, he added with a grim smile, Eleanor would haunt me if I let you go alone. Harris considered this, then nodded. I'll arrange it. Be at the airfield by 1600 hours. He extended his hand to Morgan. Bring us some answers, Colonel, and I hope your son recovers quickly. As Harris left, Morgan sank heavily into a chair, the full weight of the situation settling on him. Michael, his only child, fighting for his life in a military hospital. The strained relationship between them that had never quite healed after Morgan missed so many birthdays, school events, and holidays due to deployments. The arguments when Michael had announced he was following in his father's footsteps, joining the armor branch despite Morgan's warnings about the sacrifices it would demand. He'll pull through, Martinez said quietly, placing a hand on Morgan's shoulder. He's your son. He's got steel in his blood. Morgan nodded, but the nod of fear remained. He pulled out his phone, looking at the most recent photo of Michael, tall and proud in his officer's uniform at graduation from armor school at Fort Benning. He had Eleanor's warm brown eyes and Morgan's square jaw. In the picture, he was smiling, but there was a reserve in his expression when he looked at his father, a distance that Morgan had never known how to bridge. "I need to pack," Morgan said, standing abruptly, "and make some calls." "I'll pick you up at 1500, Martinez replied. "We'll get through this, Steele. We always do." As Morgan drove back to his empty house, his mind raced with conflicting emotions. Fear for Michael, determination to help however he could, and beneath it all, a guilty sense of purpose that had been missing since Eleanor's death. The battlefield was calling him back, not to fight, but to solve a problem that was costing young Americans their lives. At home, Morgan moved with the efficiency of a man accustomed to rapid deployments. He packed light, a few changes of clothes, toiletries, his reading glasses, and the small leather-bound copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations that had accompanied him on every mission since West Point. As he zipped his duffel bag closed, his eyes fell on the silver-framed photo on his bedside table. It showed him and Eleanor on their 30th anniversary 5 years ago, before the cancer diagnosis. She was laughing, her head thrown back, while he gazed at her with unabashed adoration. She had been his anchor, his compass, the one who kept him human through all the deployments and battles. "I'm going to need your help with this one, Ellie," he whispered to the empty room. Just as he was about to leave, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Captain James Peterson, Michael's company commander and former student of Morgan's at the armor school. "Peterson," Morgan answered, his voice tense. "Colonel Morgan," came the reply, the connection slightly distorted by distance. "I heard you were coming over." "How is he?" Morgan asked, cutting straight to what mattered. There was a brief pause. "Stable but critical. Shrapnel wounds to the chest and abdomen. He lost a lot of blood, but the field surgeons did good work. The medevac team is optimistic." Morgan closed his eyes, processing this. "What happened out there, James? The briefing showed footage, but I need to understand the full picture." "It was unlike anything we trained for, sir," Peterson admitted, his voice dropping. "We were conducting a standard movement to contact, 3 Abrams in the lead with Bradley's support. Our air defense had cleared the sector, or so we thought. The first indication of trouble was when our communications started experiencing interference. Jamming? Selective jamming. They let enough through to monitor our chatter, but degraded our ability to coordinate effectively. Then the drones appeared, small quadcopters, at first just observing. We engaged with machine guns, took a few down, but there were too many." Morgan could hear the frustration and regret in Peterson's voice. Then came the suicide drones, bigger, faster, carrying shaped charges designed to penetrate top armor. They hit 2 tanks in the first wave, including Michael's. Before we could regroup, artillery started falling with pinpoint accuracy. They knew exactly where we were, sir, like they could see through our eyes. "How did you get out?" Morgan asked. "Smoke. Lots of it. We created a wall of obscuration and pulled back to a tree line where we had better cover from above. The attack stopped once we were under the trees. It's like they didn't want to waste ammunition once we weren't in the open." Morgan processed this information, already formulating theories. "Were you able to recover the damaged vehicles?" "Negative. They were too exposed. We're planning a recovery operation, but command is hesitant to risk more assets." "I understand. I'll be there soon and we'll figure this out." Morgan hesitated, then added, "James, you should know I'm coming in an advisory capacity. I'm not taking command." "Understood, sir, but honestly, we could use your experience right now. The men are rattled. This isn't the fight we prepared for." After ending the call, Morgan stood motionless in his living room, surrounded by the echoes of his former life. The house felt different now, not just empty without Eleanor, but somehow disconnected from reality. The comfortable retirement he had planned seemed like a fantasy from another lifetime. Reality was over there in the mud and danger of Eastern Europe, where his son lay wounded and young soldiers faced a threat they didn't fully understand. The doorbell rang precisely at 1500 hours. Martinez stood on the porch dressed in civilian clothes, but with the unmistakable bearing of a career soldier. Behind him was a nondescript government SUV, engine running. "Ready?" he asked simply. Morgan nodded, shouldering his duffel bag. As he locked the front door, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was closing a chapter of his life. Whatever happened next would change everything. The drive to the airfield was mostly silent. Both men were lost in their thoughts, processing the mission ahead. As they approached the flight line, Morgan spotted a familiar figure waiting near the C-17 transport aircraft, Major Sarah Reynolds. "What's she doing here?" Morgan muttered. Martinez shrugged. "Guess we're not the only ones being sent to evaluate the situation." Reynolds approached as they parked, her expression professionally neutral. "Colonel Morgan, Sergeant Major Martinez, I've been assigned as the Pentagon's technical liaison for this mission. We'll be working together." Morgan hid his surprise and irritation behind a mask of military courtesy. "Major, I wasn't informed. The decision was made after you left the briefing," she explained. "General Harris thought it would be beneficial to have multiple perspectives. I bring expertise in drone countermeasures and electronic warfare." What she didn't say, but what Morgan clearly understood, was that she represented the opposing viewpoint, the future of warfare that looked beyond traditional armored tactics. She was there to balance his outdated perspective. "The more the merrier," Martinez said dryly, "as long as we're all focused on the same goal." Reynolds nodded crisply. "Saving American lives and developing effective countermeasures, absolutely." As they boarded the massive transport aircraft, Morgan felt the weight of the task ahead. This wasn't just about proving that tanks still had a place on the modern battlefield. It wasn't even primarily about developing new tactics, though that was the official mission. For him, it was about reaching his son, about trying to bridge the gulf between them before it was too late. And perhaps, in the process, finding a purpose to fill the void that Eleanor's death had left in his life. The massive C-17 thundered down the runway, and lifted into the afternoon sky, banking east toward Europe. Inside the cavernous cargo bay, Morgan settled into his seat, feeling the familiar vibration of military aircraft that had carried him to so many conflicts over the decades. Across from him, Reynolds was already absorbed in her laptop, reviewing technical data. Martinez had struck up a conversation with one of the loadmasters, the two NCOs finding immediate common ground despite serving in different branches. Morgan closed his eyes, not to sleep but to think. The footage from the briefing played in his mind on repeat. The sudden attack from above, the burning Abrams, the chaos that followed. Traditional armored warfare relied on certain principles that had remained largely unchanged since World War II. Use terrain for cover, concentrate forces at the decisive point, coordinate with infantry and air support, maintain momentum. But these drone swarms changed the equation. When the enemy could see you from above at all times, when artillery could be directed with pinpoint accuracy, when small, fast-moving weapons could target your weakest points, what then? He thought back to 73 Easting, to the sandstorm that had given American tanks a decisive advantage due to their thermal imaging capabilities. Sometimes the key to victory wasn't having better weapons, but better awareness. These drones relied on visual and thermal acquisition. They communicated on specific frequencies. They needed to distinguish friend from foe. Each of these requirements represented a potential vulnerability. Morgan opened his eyes, finding Reynolds watching him curiously. "Penny for your thoughts, Colonel?" she asked. "Just considering the problem from different angles," he replied. "These drone networks, have we identified their communication protocols, their methods of target acquisition?" Reynolds seemed surprised by the technical nature of his question. "To some extent, they use encrypted mesh networks for communication, frequency hopping to avoid jamming. For targeting, they appear to use a combination of thermal imaging, visual pattern recognition, and signal intelligence. So they're looking for heat signatures, visual shapes that match our vehicles, and electronic emissions," Morgan summarized, "all of which can be obscured or deceived." "In theory, yes. In practice, it's more complicated. These aren't individual drones making independent decisions. They're part of an integrated network with redundant systems. Fool one sensor and others compensate." Morgan nodded thoughtfully. "Like any good military unit, redundancy is key to survival." He leaned forward slightly. "Major, I know we have different perspectives on the future of armored warfare, but I hope we can set that aside for now. The immediate problem is keeping our soldiers alive while they fulfill their mission. Can we agree on that?" Reynolds studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Of course, Colonel. I didn't join the Army to prove points in academic debates. I joined to serve." "As did we all," Morgan replied, sensing a potential bridge. "Tell me more about these drone systems. What are their limitations? Every weapon has them." For the next hour, they discussed the technical aspects of the threat. Reynolds was clearly brilliant, with a deep understanding of electronic warfare and autonomous systems. Morgan listened carefully, asking questions that showed he wasn't the technophobic dinosaur she might have expected. Battery life is their most obvious limitation, Reynolds explained. The smaller recon drones can stay aloft for about 45 minutes. The suicide drones, carrying heavier payloads, maybe 30 minutes. They need to be launched from within a certain range of the target area. Which means there are human operators nearby, Morgan noted, and launch sites that could be identified and targeted. Exactly, but they're mobile and well-concealed, and they're learning our patterns. After the first few engagements, they started anticipating our counter-drone measures. Morgan frowned. Learning unusually fast, wouldn't you say? Reynolds hesitated. There's intelligence suggesting they may have access to our tactical playbooks, possibly through cyber intrusion, possibly through... She trailed off. Through what? Morgan pressed. There are concerns about potential intelligence leaks, she admitted reluctantly. Nothing confirmed, but the enemy's level of preparation has raised some flags. A spy, the thought was disturbing but not shocking. It wouldn't be the first time sensitive military information had been compromised, but it added another layer of complexity to an already challenging situation. As the conversation wound down, Morgan found himself reassessing Reynolds. She wasn't just a Pentagon bureaucrat with an anti-tank agenda. She was a dedicated officer trying to solve a deadly problem, even if her proposed solution differed from his own. We should get some rest, he suggested, checking his watch. It's going to be a long day tomorrow. Reynolds nodded, closing her laptop. For what it's worth, Colonel, I hope your son recovers quickly. Whatever our professional disagreements, that's personal, and I respect it. Thank you, Major, Morgan replied, surprised by the gesture. I appreciate that. As the aircraft continued its transatlantic journey, Morgan finally allowed exhaustion to overtake him. His last conscious thought before sleep claimed him was of Michael, lying wounded in a hospital bed, unaware that his father was crossing an ocean to reach his side. The landing at Ramstein Air Base in Germany came just after dawn local time. As the massive rear ramp of the C-17 lowered, Morgan was struck by the bustling activity of the base. Ramstein served as the main hub for U.S. military operations in Europe, and with the conflict in Eastern Europe escalating, it was operating at peak capacity. A young Air Force lieutenant was waiting for them at the foot of the ramp. Colonel Morgan, Major Reynolds, Sergeant Major Martinez, I'm Lieutenant Cooper. I've been assigned as your liaison while you're at Ramstein. Thank you, Lieutenant, Morgan responded. I need to get to Landstuhl Medical Center immediately. Yes, sir. We have a vehicle standing by. Your gear will be transferred to your temporary quarters. Cooper led them to a waiting SUV. As they drove the short distance to the adjacent Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, the largest American military hospital outside the United States, Morgan struggled to prepare himself emotionally. The last time he had seen Michael in person had been at Eleanor's funeral 6 months ago. Their interaction had been stiff, formal, both men too wrapped in their own grief to bridge the gap between them. Landstuhl was a sprawling complex treating wounded service members from Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. As they entered the main building, Morgan was struck by the controlled chaos, medical personnel moving purposefully, the quiet efficiency of a facility accustomed to handling the human cost of war. At the information desk, Morgan identified himself. A nurse consulted her computer, then looked up with a sympathetic expression. First Lieutenant Morgan is in the surgical ICU, sir, 6th floor. He's just out of his second surgery. Morgan's heart clenched. Second surgery? The doctor can brief you on his condition, she replied diplomatically. Family members are allowed to visit, but only for 15 minutes every hour. As they rode the elevator up, Morgan felt Martinez's steadying presence beside him. The sergeant major didn't offer empty reassurances, just quiet solidarity. Reynolds had tactfully remained in the lobby, understanding that this part of their journey was personal, not professional. The surgical ICU was a controlled environment. Morgan and Martinez had to don protective gowns, masks, and gloves before entering. A doctor met them at the nurse's station, an Army major with tired eyes and the confident demeanor of someone who had seen every manner of battlefield injury. Colonel Morgan, I'm Major Patel, the attending surgeon for your son. He's stable but still in critical condition. What happened? Morgan asked, bracing himself. Lieutenant Morgan suffered multiple shrapnel wounds when his tank was hit. The primary injuries were to his right lung and liver. We've performed 2 surgeries, one in the field hospital to stabilize him, and a more comprehensive procedure here to repair the damage to his liver and remove shrapnel fragments. Prognosis? Morgan's voice was steady, but Martinez could hear the strain beneath it. Guardedly optimistic, Dr. Patel replied. He's young and fit, which helps immensely. The next 48 hours will be crucial. If no complications develop, I'd expect a full recovery, though rehabilitation will take time. Morgan nodded, processing this. Can I see him now? Briefly, yes. He's heavily sedated, so he won't be conscious. But some studies suggest patients can still hear and respond to familiar voices even in this state. The doctor led them to a glass-enclosed room. Morgan stopped at the threshold, momentarily overwhelmed by the sight of his son. Michael lay motionless, connected to a ventilator and surrounded by monitoring equipment. His normally robust frame seemed diminished beneath the hospital blanket. His face, what was visible of it around the breathing tube, was pale and still. Morgan moved to the bedside, Martinez hanging back to give him privacy. For a moment, he simply stood there, taking in the reality of his wounded child. Then, with gentle hesitation, he placed his hand over Michael's. Hey, Mike, he said softly, using the nickname his son had preferred as a boy. It's Dad. I'm here. There was no response, just the steady beeping of monitors and the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator. Morgan continued anyway, his voice low and steady. You're going to be okay. You've got good doctors here. The best. He paused, searching for words. I know things have been difficult between us, but I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere until you're back on your feet. Morgan's throat tightened unexpectedly. In that moment, the years fell away, and he wasn't seeing a 28-year-old lieutenant, but the small boy who had once looked at him with unconditional adoration. Before the missed baseball games and school plays, before the arguments about Morgan's frequent absences, before Michael had built his own wall of reserve, mirroring his father's emotional distance. Your mother would be so proud of you, Morgan whispered, squeezing Michael's hand gently. She always was. A nurse appeared at the door, signaling that their time was up. Morgan reluctantly stepped back, his eyes never leaving his son's face. I'll be back soon, he promised. You rest now. In the corridor outside, Morgan took a moment to compose himself. Martinez waited patiently, understanding the emotional toll of seeing a loved one wounded. He's tough, Martinez offered finally, like his old man. Morgan managed a tight smile. Tougher, I hope. Lieutenant Cooper was waiting for them when they returned to the lobby, where Reynolds was engaged in a phone conversation, her expression serious. Sir, Cooper addressed Morgan, I've received updated orders. You're scheduled to depart for Forward Operating Base Sentinel at 1400 hours. That's the headquarters for the 1st Armored Division's operations in the conflict zone. Morgan checked his watch. It was just past 0900. That gives me a few more hours with my son. Yes, sir. There's also a secure briefing scheduled for 1100 hours here at Ramstein. UCOM leadership wants to speak with your team before you head into the AO. Reynolds finished her call and joined them, her expression troubled. That was the Pentagon. There's been another incident. Morgan's attention sharpened. What happened? A recovery operations to retrieve the damaged tanks, including your son's. They sent in a team with Bradley fighting vehicles for protection. The enemy was waiting for them, same drone swarm tactics, but this time they had something new, ground-based autonomous weapons as well. Casualties? Martinez asked grimly. 4 wounded, no KIAs thankfully, but they had to abort the mission. The vehicles are still out there. Morgan absorbed this, his tactical mind already analyzing the implications. They anticipated our response, they're watching and learning. Which is why UCOM wants us there ASAP, Reynolds confirmed. This isn't just about developing countermeasures anymore. Intelligence believes they're using our equipment to refine their tactics and possibly reverse engineer our technology. Morgan nodded grimly. He turned to Cooper. Lieutenant, I need to make the most of the time before our departure. I want to visit my son again. Then I need access to all available intelligence on these attacks. Drone footage, after-action reports, technical analyses, everything. Yes, sir, I'll make the arrangements. As Cooper stepped away to make calls, Morgan turned to Martinez and Reynolds. This just became more complicated. It's not just about protecting our tanks anymore. We need to deny them access to the technology and data from the vehicles they've disabled. A recovery operation under these conditions would be extremely high risk, Reynolds pointed out, especially given that they seem to be anticipating our moves. Then we'll need to think of something they won't anticipate, Morgan replied, a hint of his old battlefield intensity returning. Something that changes the rules of engagement. For the first time since their meeting, Reynolds looked at Morgan with something approaching respect. Any ideas, Colonel? Morgan's expression was grim but determined. A few. But first, I need more time with my son, and then we need that intelligence briefing. We won't solve this problem by rushing in blind. As he headed back toward the elevator for another brief visit with Michael, Morgan felt a clarity of purpose that had been missing since his retirement. His son was fighting for his life. Young American soldiers were facing a threat they weren't prepared for, and someone, possibly someone on their own side, was helping the enemy stay one step ahead. The mission had evolved beyond an advisory role or even a rescue operation. This was now about identifying a critical vulnerability in American armored warfare and finding a solution before more lives were lost. This was about adaptation and evolution, the very principles that had kept tanks relevant on the battlefield for over a century. And for Richard Steele Morgan, it was about proving that experience and innovation weren't mutually exclusive, that sometimes the old warriors had the clearest vision of the new battlefield. As he stood once more at his son's bedside, Morgan made a silent promise. He would find a way to defeat these drone networks. He would ensure that Michael's sacrifice and the sacrifices of all the young soldiers facing this threat would not be in vain. And perhaps, if he succeeded, he would finally bridge the gap between himself and his son, healing wounds far deeper than those inflicted by enemy shrapnel. With renewed determination, Morgan prepared himself for the battles ahead, both on the technological battlefield of drone warfare and the personal one of reconnecting with his son. Both would require all the courage, wisdom, and adaptability he had gained through his decades of service. And both were fights he refused to lose. The C-130 Hercules transport plane descended through turbulent air, its 4 propeller engines straining against crosswinds. Inside the Spartan fuselage, Colonel Richard Morgan braced himself against the metal frame of his seat as the aircraft bucked and swayed. The familiar discomfort of military transport brought an odd sense of comfort. Some things never change, regardless of advancements in warfare. Beside him, Sergeant Major Frank Martinez dozed despite the turbulence, a skill perfected through countless deployments. Across the narrow aisle, Major Sarah Reynolds studied tablet data, occasionally making notes with practiced efficiency. The tension between Morgan's old-school approach and Reynolds' tech-focused mindset remained palpable, though their shared briefing at Ramstein had established a grudging professional respect. Morgan's thoughts drifted back to Michael, lying unconscious in the hospital. He had visited his son one final time before departure, speaking softly about memories from Michael's childhood, fishing trips to Lake Travis, weekend visits to the Alamo, the model tank collection they had built together before Morgan's deployments became more frequent, and the connection between father and son began to fray. The aircraft lurched sharply, jolting Martinez awake. Approaching the LZ, the loadmaster announced, moving down the aisle to check safety harnesses. Expect evasive maneuvers during final approach. We've had reports of enemy drone activity in the area. Morgan exchanged glances with Reynolds. The threat was no longer theoretical, it was immediate and real. Forward Operating Base Sentinel had been established 3 months earlier in an abandoned industrial complex. As the C-130 made its final approach, Morgan could see the fortified perimeter through the small porthole window. Concrete barriers, razor wire, guard towers with electronic surveillance equipment. Beyond the base, the landscape was a patchwork of rolling farmland, dense forests, and scattered villages. The landing was rough but controlled, the pilot executing a steep combat descent to minimize vulnerability to ground fire or drone attacks. As the rear ramp lowered, Morgan was hit by the familiar sensory assault of an active forward base, the smell of jet fuel and diesel exhaust, the distant thump of artillery, the constant hum of generators. Captain James Peterson was waiting on the tarmac, his face showing the strain of recent combat. At 35, Peterson had already completed 3 combat tours before this deployment. Morgan had instructed him at Fort Benning 5 years earlier and had recognized his potential immediately. Colonel Morgan, Peterson saluted crisply. Welcome to Phobie Sentinel. Morgan returned the salute. Captain, how are things holding up? Peterson's expression tightened. We're adapting, sir, or trying to. He nodded to Martinez and Reynolds. Sergeant Major, we've got transportation waiting. Command wants to see you immediately. As they climbed into a dust-covered Humvee, Morgan studied the base through the tactical eye of a veteran commander. The usual rhythm of a forward operating base was evident. Soldiers moving with purpose, vehicles being maintained, supplies being distributed. But there was something else, a tension in the air that went beyond normal combat stress. Morale? Morgan asked simply. Peterson hesitated, glancing at Reynolds before answering. Challenge, sir. We've lost equipment and men to an enemy we can't effectively engage. The traditional advantages of armored warfare don't apply here. The men feel vulnerable. Reynolds leaned forward. Have the counter-drone systems been deployed? Yes, ma'am, they help, but the enemy adapts quickly. They switch frequencies, change attack patterns. It's like they're learning our playbook as we write it. Morgan frowned. The intelligence briefing at Ramstein had revealed disturbing patterns that suggested insider knowledge of American tactics and technical capabilities. Someone was providing the enemy with critical information, and the circle of suspects was disturbingly small. The Humvee pulled up outside a reinforced concrete building marked as the Tactical Operations Center. Inside, they were led to a conference room where Colonel William Harker, the regimental commander, waited with his staff. Harker was a solidly built man in his early 50s with close-cropped gray hair and the weathered look of a career soldier. His expression was grim as he greeted them. Morgan, Martinez. He nodded to each, then turned to Reynolds with slightly less warmth. Major. After brief introductions, Harker activated a large digital display on the wall. Let me show you what we're dealing with. The screen displayed aerial imagery of an open field. In the center was the unmistakable silhouette of an M1 Abrams tank, partially concealed by camouflage netting. This was from 3 days ago. Reconnaissance mission, 3rd Platoon, Alpha Company. Harker tapped a control and the footage began to play. Watch closely. The image showed the tank moving slowly along the edge of a tree line. Suddenly, small objects appeared in the frame, moving with startling speed. Drone swarm, Harker explained unnecessarily. First wave is reconnaissance, identifying the target. The small drones circled the tank briefly, then withdrew. Moments later, larger drones appeared, moving in a coordinated pattern. Attack drones carrying shaped charges. Note the flight pattern. They're maximizing coverage to ensure at least one gets through. On screen, the tank crew reacted, the main gun elevating to track the threat, the coaxial machine gun firing desperately at the approaching drones. One drone exploded in midair, then another. But there were too many. 2 drones impacted the tank simultaneously, one striking the turret, another hitting the engine compartment. The screen went momentarily white from the explosion. When the image cleared, the tank was burning, black smoke pouring from the open hatches as crew members scrambled to escape. Morgan felt his jaw tighten. The tank in the footage wasn't just any Abrams, it was Michael's. We attempted a recovery operation yesterday, Harker continued, switching to different footage. Enemy was waiting for us, same tactics but with a new wrinkle. The new footage showed a recovery team approaching the disabled tank. As they neared it, small objects emerged from the surrounding vegetation, ground-based autonomous weapons, similar to small remote-controlled vehicles, but moving with the telltale precision of AI guidance. They've mined the area around our disabled vehicles with these, Harker explained. Autonomous anti-personnel mines, essentially. They identify targets and move to intercept. Conventional mine-clearing tactics are ineffective. Morgan studied the footage intently. Have we captured any of these devices? Analyzed their systems? One, Harker replied. Major Reynolds can brief you on the technical details. Bottom line, they're highly sophisticated, using advanced target recognition algorithms to distinguish between combatants and non-combatants. They specifically target our recovery teams. Reynolds stepped forward. The device we captured was damaged, but preliminary analysis suggests it's using a combination of thermal imaging, visual pattern recognition, and acoustic sensors. The processor appears to be a modified military-grade AI system. Most concerning is that it contained recognition data specific to American equipment and uniforms. The implication hung heavy in the room. These weren't generic autonomous weapons. They had been programmed specifically to target American forces. So, Morgan said, his voice deliberately measured, we have an enemy using coordinated drone swarms for reconnaissance and attack, backed by ground-based autonomous weapons, all programmed with detailed knowledge of our equipment, tactics, and procedures. He looked directly at Harker, and somehow they know exactly when and where we'll be vulnerable. Harker's expression darkened. That's the assessment, yes. Which leads to the question, how are they getting this intelligence? The room fell silent. It was the question everyone had been avoiding, the one with the most disturbing implications. We're implementing heightened operational security measures, Harker said finally. Mission details are compartmentalized, communications are encrypted with daily changing protocols, and we've restricted access to tactical planning sessions. And yet they still seem to know our moves, Morgan observed. Yes, Harker admitted, which is why you're here. We need fresh eyes on this problem, someone who understands armored warfare fundamentally, but isn't constrained by current doctrine. The Pentagon briefed me on your advisory role. Whatever resources you need are at your disposal. Morgan nodded, already formulating a plan. I want to see the disabled vehicles, not via drone footage, in person. Harker exchanged glances with his operations officer. That's extremely high risk, Colonel. The area is under constant surveillance by enemy drones, which is exactly why I need to see it. To understand how they're targeting our vehicles, I need to examine the damage patterns firsthand. Morgan turned to Martinez. We'll need a technical assessment as well. What components they're targeting, what systems remain intact? Martinez nodded his agreement. If they're hitting the same vulnerabilities consistently, that tells us something about their targeting algorithms. It's too exposed, Harker objected. We've already lost one recovery team. We won't go in with a conventional recovery force, Morgan countered. Small team, night movement, minimal electronic signature. Get in, assess the vehicles, document what we find, get out. No recovery attempt. Reynolds, who had been quietly analyzing the footage, spoke up. I should accompany you. There's technical data I need to collect. Electronic warfare signatures, targeting system remnants. Morgan considered this. Having Reynolds along complicated things, but her expertise would be valuable. Agreed, but you follow my lead. This will be an infantry operation, not a technical exercise. Harker still looked unconvinced, but the authority granted to Morgan by EUCOM left him little choice. Very well, I'll assign you a security team from our reconnaissance platoon. They know the terrain and enemy patterns, but I want to be clear. This is intelligence gathering only. If you encounter significant resistance, you withdraw immediately. Understood, Morgan agreed. One more thing. I want to speak with the survivors from Michael's crew. Their first-hand accounts will be invaluable. Of course, they're still here, assigned to base security while awaiting replacement equipment. Harker checked his watch. We'll plan the reconnaissance mission for tonight. Until then, get settled in, review our tactical data, and meet with the tank crew. Peterson will show you to your quarters. As they left the TOC, Morgan felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about developing new tactics or protecting tanks. It was about the lives of young soldiers facing an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. And somewhere in the mountains of technical data and combat footage was the key, not just to defeating the drone threat, but to uncovering how the enemy was staying one step ahead. Peterson led them to a cluster of prefabricated containers serving as officers' quarters. Not exactly the Ritz, but it beats a tent, he remarked as he showed them their assigned spaces. Colonel Morgan, Sergeant Major Martinez, you're in these two. Major Reynolds, yours is the one at the end. The accommodations were Spartan but functional. A narrow bed, a small desk, a metal locker, and a window covered with ballistic glass, home for the duration. The tank crew will meet you at the motor pool in 1 hour, Peterson informed them. Anything else you need? Latest intelligence on enemy drone operations, Morgan replied. Flight patterns, launch sites, communication frequencies, anything you've gathered. I'll have it sent to your tablets. Peterson hesitated, then added in a lower voice, Sir, about Michael, the men in his crew, they did everything they could. When the tank was hit, he ordered them out first before extracting himself. That's when he took the worst of his injuries. Morgan nodded, a complex mix of pride and pain tightening his chest. It was exactly what he would have done, putting the crew's safety before his own. The Morgan family code, mission first, men always, self last. After Peterson departed, Morgan took a moment to collect his thoughts. He unpacked his few belongings, placing the small copy of Meditations on the desk alongside a faded photograph of Eleanor and Michael from happier times. Martinez appeared in the doorway. Just like old times, eh, Steele? Cramped quarters, impossible mission, enemy with all the advantages. Morgan managed a grim smile. Seems to be our specialty. What's your read on this situation, the intelligence angle specifically? Morgan lowered his voice, mindful of potential listening devices. Someone's feeding them information, tactical plans, technical specifications, maybe even real-time intelligence during operations. The question is, who has access to all that? Command staff, intelligence officers, communications specialists, and technical advisors, Morgan added, thinking of Reynolds. Martinez raised an eyebrow. You suspect her? I suspect everyone at this point. Her timing and placement are convenient, but that doesn't mean she's involved. Could be someone back at UCOM or the Pentagon. Could be electronic eavesdropping. But someone is compromising our operations, and until we know who, we trust no one with operational details. Martinez nodded his agreement. Like Desert Storm. Need-to-know basis only, compartmentalized planning. Exactly. For tonight's mission, we plan in person, minimal documentation, no electronic devices present. Old school. An hour later, they made their way to the motor pool, where the massive maintenance hangar housed the regiment's operational vehicles. The distinctive smell of diesel fuel, hydraulic fluid, and gun oil brought back memories of countless hours spent maintaining the complex machines of war. In a corner of the hangar, 3 soldiers waited beside a partially disassembled Bradley fighting vehicle. As Morgan approached, they snapped to attention. At ease, Morgan said, studying each face. I'm Colonel Morgan. This is Sergeant Major Martinez and Major Reynolds. We're here to understand exactly what happened to your tank. The senior of the 3, a staff sergeant with a bandaged arm, stepped forward. Staff Sergeant Walker, sir. I was the gunner on Lieutenant Morgan's tank. This is Specialist Chen, our loader, and Private First Class Rodriguez, our driver. Morgan nodded to each man, noting their youthful faces and wary expressions. I appreciate you meeting with us. I know you've already filed reports, but I need to hear it directly from you. Walk me through what happened from the beginning. Walker glanced at his teammates before speaking. We were conducting a forward reconnaissance along the eastern approach to Objective Bravo. Lieutenant Morgan was in command, with 2 other tanks from our platoon about 500 meters behind us in overwatch positions. Weather conditions? Visibility? Morgan prompted. Clear day, good visibility. We were maintaining emission control protocols, minimal radio traffic, passive sensors only when possible. Morgan nodded, the standard procedures for operating in a high-threat environment. First indication of trouble was communications interference. Walker continued. Our battalion net started breaking up, but our internal comms were still good. Lieutenant Morgan ordered us to fall back to the next covered position while he tried to re-establish contact with platoon headquarters. That's when we spotted the first drones, Rodriguez interjected. Small quadcopters just hovering at the tree line, watching us. Lieutenant Morgan ordered me to engage with the Cokes, Walker said, referring to the machine gun mounted alongside the main gun. I took down 2, maybe 3, but there were more coming from different directions. They were coordinated, Chen added, not just flying randomly, like they were mapping our position, finding the best angles of attack. Walker nodded. Lieutenant Morgan recognized the threat pattern. He'd been briefed on previous attacks. He ordered us to pop smoke and prepare for immediate action. We deployed the smoke grenades, but it was too late. The attack drones were already inbound. Describe them, Reynolds requested. Bigger than the recon drones. Fixed wing, not quadcopters. Moving fast, maybe 60 to 70 miles per hour. Coming in at an angle aimed at the top of the turret in the engine compartment. I traversed the turret to engage, Walker continued, but they were coming from multiple vectors simultaneously. I got one with the main gun, proximity fuse on a high explosive round, and another with the Cokes, but 2 of them got through. His voice tightened. First one hit just behind the turret ring, blew through the top armor like it was paper. Second one hit the engine compartment. Fire suppression system activated, but it wasn't enough. Lieutenant Morgan ordered us to bail out immediately. Chen and I got out through our hatches, Rodriguez said. Lieutenant Morgan was helping Sergeant Walker, whose arm was injured in the initial blast. That's when the secondary explosion happened. Lieutenant Morgan, he shielded Sergeant Walker with his own body, took the brunt of it himself. Walker looked down, his expression a mixture of guilt and admiration. He saved my life, sir, no question about it. Morgan felt a surge of pride through his concern. His son had acted with courage and self-sacrifice, putting his crew's lives before his own. The Morgan family way. What happened after you evacuated the vehicle, he asked. We established a defensive position about 50 meters from the tank, Walker replied. Lieutenant Morgan was badly wounded, bleeding heavily. We applied first aid, called for immediate medevac. The other tanks in our platoon provided covering fire while the medevac helicopter extracted us. In the tank itself, did you observe any unusual activity around it after you withdrew? The 3 crew members exchanged glances. Yes, sir. Walker said finally. About an hour after we were evacuated, drone footage showed enemy personnel approaching the tank. They appeared to be technical specialists, not regular infantry. They were examining the damage, taking photographs, possibly removing components. This confirmed Morgan's suspicions. The enemy wasn't just destroying American armor. They were studying it, learning its vulnerabilities, perhaps even salvaging technology. One more thing, Chen added hesitantly. Before the attack, Lieutenant Morgan mentioned something strange. He said it felt like we were being herded, like the intermittent communications failures were deliberate, designed to push us into a specific area. Morgan's eyes narrowed. Did he elaborate on that? No, sir. That's when the drones appeared. Reynolds, who had been taking notes, looked up. Did you observe any unusual electronic signatures before the attack? Power fluctuations, sensor anomalies, navigation discrepancies? Rodriguez nodded. Our GPS was glitching. Position data would jump around, then stabilize, then jump again. Lieutenant Morgan switched to manual navigation, using terrain features instead of relying on electronics. Another piece of the puzzle. GPS spoofing could be used to manipulate a vehicle's movement, guiding it into an ambush zone without the crew realizing it. Thank you all, Morgan said sincerely. You performed admirably under extremely difficult circumstances. Your information will help us develop countermeasures to protect other tank crews. After the tank crew departed, Morgan turned to Martinez and Reynolds. Thoughts? Targeted electronic warfare preceding the attack, Reynolds said immediately. Communications jamming, GPS spoofing, possibly sensor manipulation. They're using our electronic dependencies against us. And the attack drones are specifically targeting known vulnerabilities in the Abrams, Martinez added. Top armor over the turret ring, the engine compartment. That's not random. That's precise knowledge of the vehicle's weak points. Morgan nodded grimly. And afterward, they send in technical specialists to study the damage and salvage components. This isn't just about battlefield victories. They're gathering intelligence, refining their tactics based on results. The question is, how do we counter it? Reynolds asked. We start by understanding exactly what they're doing and how they're doing it. Tonight's reconnaissance mission will give us first-hand data. Morgan checked his watch. We have 4 hours until sunset. Let's review everything we have on their drone operations, then plan our approach. The next 3 hours were spent in intensive review of intelligence data. Reynolds analyzed electronic warfare patterns, identifying frequencies and methods used for jamming and spoofing. Martinez focused on the technical aspects of the drone attacks, studying damage patterns to understand targeting priorities. Morgan examined the tactical situation from a commander's perspective, looking for patterns in how enemy forces selected and engaged their targets. What emerged was a disturbing picture of a highly sophisticated adversary with detailed knowledge of American equipment, tactics, and procedures. The attacks weren't random. They were systematically targeting specific vulnerabilities, adapting tactics based on observed results, and anticipating countermeasures before they were even deployed. As sunset approached, Morgan met with the reconnaissance team assigned to their night mission. 4 soldiers from the regiment's scout platoon, specialists in covert movement and observation. Their leader, Staff Sergeant Wilson, was a veteran of multiple deployments with the quiet confidence of a professional scout. We'll move on foot, Morgan explained, pointing to a map spread on the table. No vehicles, minimal equipment, absolute electronic silence. Our objective is to reach the disabled tanks, conduct a thorough examination, document our findings, and extract without detection. Wilson studied the route Morgan had outlined. There's a drainage culvert that runs along this ridgeline, provides good cover from aerial observation. We've used it before for infiltration. Enemy drone patterns? They maintain continuous coverage of the main avenues of approach, but the surveillance is thinner in the rougher terrain to the north. If we time our movement between their coverage cycles, we should be able to reach the objective undetected. Morgan nodded his approval. Sergeant Major Martinez, Major Reynolds, and I will conduct the technical assessment of the vehicles. Your team provides security and ensures our extraction route remains clear. Questions? There were none. These men understood their mission and the risks involved. We move at 2200 hours, Morgan concluded. No electronic devices except the specialized equipment Major Reynolds needs for her analysis. Weapons, night vision, and basic survival gear only. As the team dispersed to prepare, Reynolds approached Morgan privately. Colonel, I need to be clear about something. The data I'm collecting isn't just for tactical analysis. The Pentagon believes these drone systems may incorporate stolen American technology. Part of my mission is to confirm or deny that suspicion. Morgan studied her carefully. And if it is our technology, then we have a much bigger problem than battlefield tactics. It would mean a significant breach of national security, one that might extend beyond this conflict. The implication was clear. If American drone technology had been compromised, the vulnerability could affect military operations worldwide. This added another dimension to their mission, one with potentially strategic implications. Understood, Morgan said finally. But on the ground, we follow tactical protocols. My primary concern is the safety of our team and the successful completion of our reconnaissance. Of course, Reynolds agreed. I'm a soldier first, analyst second. As darkness fell over the base, the team made final preparations. Morgan changed into the muted camouflage pattern used by the reconnaissance platoon, checked his weapon, an M4 carbine with suppressor, and packed the minimal equipment needed for the mission. No insignia, no identification beyond dog tags, nothing that would distinguish him as an officer if captured. Martinez found him adjusting his night vision goggles outside the barracks. Just like old times, the sergeant major remarked, his own equipment already checked and ready. Except we're a bit older and slower, Morgan replied with a grim smile. Speak for yourself, Steele. I can still outrun most of these kids. The familiar banter eased some of the tension. They had been in countless high-risk situations together over the decades, developing the wordless communication and absolute trust that came from shared danger. Your assessment of Reynolds? Morgan asked quietly. Martinez considered this. Smart, committed, bit of a technological true believer, but not blindly so. If she's involved in any intelligence compromise, she's hiding it well. Keep an eye on her tonight. Anything unusual? Anything that doesn't fit the mission parameters, I want to know immediately. At precisely 2200 hours, the team assembled at the northern perimeter of the base. Final equipment checks were conducted in silence, night vision systems were activated, and communications were limited to hand signals and whispered words. They moved out in single file, Wilson in the lead, followed by two of his scouts, then Morgan, Reynolds, and Martinez, with the remaining scout as rear security. The night was clear but moonless, ideal conditions for covert movement with night vision equipment. The landscape beyond the base was a mixture of agricultural fields and patches of dense forest, with rolling hills providing both cover and concealment. Wilson led them along the drainage culvert he had identified, a dry watercourse that provided excellent concealment from aerial observation. Progress was slow and methodical. Every few hundred meters, Wilson would signal a halt, and the team would freeze in place while he checked for drone activity or enemy patrols. Twice, they remained motionless for over 15 minutes as enemy reconnaissance drones passed overhead, their faint buzzing barely audible in the night air. After 2 hours of careful movement, they approached the ridgeline overlooking the area where the disabled tanks had been abandoned. Wilson signaled another halt, then crawled forward with Morgan to observe the objective. Through his night vision goggles, Morgan could see the silhouettes of 3 Abrams tanks spread across the open field below. One, Michael's, was clearly damaged, with the turret partially collapsed and the engine compartment a blackened ruin. The other 2 showed less visible damage but were equally immobile. No visible enemy activity, Wilson whispered, but they've definitely been here. Look at the track patterns around the vehicles. Morgan nodded. The disturbed earth around the tanks showed evidence of recent activity, foot traffic and what appeared to be small vehicle tracks, possibly from the autonomous ground weapons they had observed in the reconnaissance footage. We'll approach from the western edge, Morgan decided. Use that tree line for cover until the last 100 meters. Sergeant Major Martinez and I will examine the tanks. Major Reynolds will collect her electronic data. Your team establishes a perimeter and watches for drone activity. Wilson nodded his understanding. They rejoined the rest of the team, and Morgan briefed them on the approach plan. 20 minutes later, they were moving carefully across the open ground toward the nearest tank. As they neared the massive vehicle, Morgan was struck by the precision of the damage. The attack drones had targeted specific vulnerabilities with surgical accuracy: the junction between the turret and hull, the engine air intakes, the commander's hatch. This wasn't indiscriminate destruction. It was methodical, calculated disabling of key systems. Morgan and Martinez circled the tank, documenting the damage with small, light-amplified cameras. Reynolds moved between the vehicles using specialized equipment to scan for electronic signatures and collect technical data. They knew exactly where to hit. Martinez whispered as they examined the turret damage. See how the shaped charge was placed to maximize penetration at the weakest point of the armor? That's not luck. That's detailed knowledge of the Abrams design. Morgan nodded grimly. And look at this. He pointed to where access panels had been removed from the tank's electronic systems. They've extracted components, targeting systems, communications equipment, possibly the fire control computer. Reverse engineering, Martinez suggested. Or verification, Morgan countered, confirming what they already knew from technical data. They moved to Michael's tank next. The damage was more extensive, consistent with the crew's report of multiple drone strikes and secondary explosions. Morgan found himself pausing at the commander's hatch, imagining his son in those final moments before the attack. Alert, professional, putting his crew's safety above his own. "Colonel," Reynolds called softly from the far side of the vehicle. "You need to see this." Morgan moved around the tank to find Reynolds examining a small device attached to the underside of the hull. It was roughly the size of a paperback book, with no visible markings or indicators. "What am I looking at?" Morgan asked. "I'm not entirely sure," Reynolds admitted, "but it's not a standard component of the Abrams. It appears to be some kind of tracking or monitoring device." Morgan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "Can you remove it safely?" Reynolds studied the device carefully. "I think so. It doesn't appear to be booby-trapped, but I'll need to scan it first to be sure." While Reynolds worked, Morgan continued his examination of the tank. The pattern of damage, the extracted components, and now this mysterious device all pointed to a level of sophistication and knowledge that was deeply troubling. Suddenly, Wilson appeared at his side. "Movement to the north," he whispered urgently. "Vehicle engines, at least 2, maybe more." Morgan tensed, listening. In the distance, he could hear the faint rumble of approaching vehicles. "Time to extraction point? 20 minutes minimum. And the vehicles?" "Based on engine sound, less than 10 minutes out." A difficult decision. They had gathered crucial intelligence, but their mission wasn't complete. Reynolds was still extracting the mysterious device, and there were components of the other tanks they hadn't yet examined. "Continue the mission," Morgan decided. "Reynolds, how much longer?" 5 minutes to safely extract this device. "You have 3. Martinez, check the third tank. Focus on the electronic systems. Wilson, move 2 of your men to cover our northern approach. If those vehicles reach visual range of our position, we extract immediately, complete or not." The team moved with increased urgency. Reynolds carefully detached the mysterious device and secured it in a specialized container. Martinez completed his examination of the third tank, documenting additional evidence of component extraction. The reconnaissance team maintained their security perimeter, 2 members now positioned to observe the approaching vehicles. "Vehicles changing direction," one of the scouts reported via radio. "Moving east now, away from our position." Morgan felt a moment of relief, but it was short-lived. "Everyone, complete final documentation and prepare to extract. We've pushed our luck far enough." As they regrouped and began their withdrawal, Morgan took a final look at the disabled tanks. In the eerie green glow of his night vision, they resembled ancient monoliths, monuments to a form of warfare that was rapidly being transformed by technology and asymmetric tactics. The extraction followed the same careful protocols as their infiltration, with Wilson leading them along concealed routes that minimize exposure to aerial observation. The team moved in silence, alert for any sign of enemy activity. They were halfway back to the base when Wilson suddenly signaled an emergency halt. Ahead, barely visible, even with night vision, was the silhouette of a small quadcopter drone hovering motionless above the drainage culvert they had been following. The team froze in place, using available cover to break up their outlines. The drone remained stationary for nearly 5 minutes, its sensors scanning the terrain below. Then, without warning, it ascended rapidly and moved away to the east. "Random patrol or deliberate search?" Morgan whispered to Wilson. "Hard to say," the scout leader replied. "But we should change our route. That culvert is probably being watched now." Morgan agreed. They altered course, moving through denser vegetation that provided better concealment but slower progress. The adjustment added nearly an hour to their journey, but they reached the base perimeter without further incident just before dawn. Once inside the security of the base, Morgan ordered the team to report to the debriefing room in 1 hour, time enough for everyone to clean up and organize their findings. Reynolds took the mysterious device to a secure technical area for preliminary analysis, while Martinez began processing the photographic documentation they had gathered. Morgan used the time to gather his thoughts and prepare his initial assessment. The evidence they had collected painted a disturbing picture. An enemy with detailed knowledge of American armor, sophisticated drone technology that precisely targeted known vulnerabilities, and the technical capability to extract and presumably analyze complex military systems. But the most troubling discovery was the tracking device. If similar devices were attached to other vehicles, it would explain how enemy forces always seem to know their movements and dispositions. In the debriefing room, the team assembled with Colonel Harker and his intelligence officer. Reynolds arrived last, her expression grave as she took her seat. Preliminary findings, Morgan began without preamble. The enemy has detailed knowledge of Abrams' vulnerabilities and is targeting them with precision drone strikes. After disabling the vehicles, they send in technical teams to extract specific components, targeting systems, communications equipment, fire control computers. This isn't just about battlefield victory, it's about technology acquisition. He nodded to Reynolds, who activated a display showing the device they had recovered. Major Reynolds discovered this attached to my son's tank. Major urinalysis? Reynolds stood. It's a sophisticated tracking and monitoring device. It broadcasts on multiple frequencies, making it difficult to detect or jam. Based on its design and capabilities, it appears to be a modified version of a system originally developed for U.S. Special Operations. A heavy silence fell over the room. The implication was clear and disturbing. Are you saying, Harker asked slowly, that the enemy is using our own technology against us? That's exactly what I'm saying, sir, Reynolds confirmed. This isn't just similar to American technology. It is American technology, modified and repurposed. The encryption protocols, the frequency hopping algorithms, these are proprietary systems that should not be in enemy hands. Morgan studied the faces around the table, looking for any reaction that might betray guilty knowledge. The question is, how did they get it? And more importantly, how many of our vehicles have similar devices attached to them? Harker turned to his intelligence officer. I want every vehicle in this regiment inspected immediately, top to bottom, inside and out. If there are more of these devices, I want to know about it. There's more, sir, Reynolds continued. Based on the data collected last night, I believe the enemy drone systems are also incorporating elements of American technology. The target acquisition algorithms, the autonomous coordination capabilities, these bear striking similarities to systems currently in development by DARPA and defense contractors. So we're not just facing an enemy with good intelligence, Morgan summarized. We're facing an enemy using our own technology against us. Technology that should be highly classified and restricted. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a tactical problem. It was a major breach of national security. I need to report this to EUCOM immediately, Harker said. This goes beyond our operational concerns. Morgan nodded his agreement. In the meantime, we need to develop countermeasures. If they're using modified American technology, there may be exploitable weaknesses that we can target. The meeting continued for another hour as they discussed immediate tactical responses and longer-term strategies. It was agreed that all vehicles would be thoroughly inspected for tracking devices, electronic emissions would be even more strictly controlled, and a comprehensive review of security protocols would be implemented. As the meeting concluded, Harker asked Morgan and Reynolds to remain behind. Once the others had departed, he activated an electronic countermeasures device to prevent eavesdropping. There's another dimension to this that we haven't discussed openly, Harker said, his voice low despite the security measures. If the enemy has access to this level of classified American technology, it suggests a significant breach within our own ranks, possibly at a very high level. Morgan had reached the same conclusion. Someone with access to technical specifications, operational protocols, and deployment plans. EUCOM is conducting a compartmentalized investigation, Harker revealed. Very few people know about it. They suspect the breach may involve defense contractors with access to both technology development and operational planning. Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. That would explain the level of technical sophistication we're seeing. These aren't crude copies, they're advanced adaptations of American systems. What's our next step? Morgan asked. Continue developing tactical countermeasures, Harker replied. That's our immediate priority. Keep our soldiers alive and our equipment operational. The counterintelligence investigation will proceed on its own track. With all due respect, sir, Morgan said, those tracks need to converge. If there's a breach affecting our operations here, we need to know about it. The tactical and strategic aspects of this can't be separated. Harker considered this, then nodded reluctantly. I'll speak with EUCOM, See if we can get more information about the investigation. In the meantime, I want you both to continue your work. Develop countermeasures based on what we now know about the enemy's capabilities. After leaving the meeting, Morgan found Martinez waiting for him outside the TOC. The sergeant major fell into step beside him as they walked toward the motor pool. "How much did you tell him?" Martinez asked quietly. "Enough," Morgan replied. "There's an ongoing counterintelligence investigation. Defense contractors are the primary suspects." "Makes sense. They have the technical knowledge and the access, but someone has to be feeding them operational details as well." Morgan nodded grimly. "Which brings us back to our immediate concerns. We need to develop countermeasures, and quickly. The regiment can't remain on the defensive indefinitely." The motor pool was a hive of activity as maintenance crews swarmed over every vehicle, inspecting for hidden tracking devices. Morgan and Martinez observed the process, occasionally offering guidance based on their findings from the night's reconnaissance. By mid-afternoon, the results were troubling. 3 more tracking devices had been discovered, attached to different vehicles in the regiment. Each was carefully removed and secured for analysis, but the damage was done. The enemy had been monitoring their movements, perhaps for weeks or even months. Morgan was examining one of the devices when Captain Peterson approached, his expression tense. "Colonel, we've just received a message from Landstuhl Medical Center. It's about Lieutenant Morgan." Morgan's heart seemed to skip a beat. "What is it?" "He's regained consciousness, sir. The doctors say his condition has stabilized, and his prognosis is positive." Relief washed over Morgan like a physical force. "Thank you, Captain. That's good news." Peterson hesitated, then added, "There's more, sir. He's asking for you." The simple statement carried emotional weight that caught Morgan off guard. Michael was asking for him, not as a commanding officer checking on a wounded soldier, but as a father. "I understand," Morgan said, struggling to maintain his professional demeanor. "Unfortunately, I can't leave at the moment. We're in the middle of developing critical countermeasures." "Of course, sir. I'll arrange a video call when you're available." After Peterson departed, Martinez gave Morgan a knowing look. "You should take the call, Steele. Some things are more important than tactical planning." Morgan nodded, acknowledging the truth in his friend's words. "I will, but first, we need to make progress on these countermeasures. Michael and every other soldier here are depending on us to solve this problem." They spent the rest of the day working with Reynolds and the regiment's technical experts, analyzing the drone threat and developing potential countermeasures. The work was intensive, drawing on Morgan's decades of tactical experience, Martinez's technical knowledge of armored systems, and Reynolds' expertise in electronic warfare and drone technology. By evening, they had formulated the outline of a plan, a multi-layered approach that combined traditional tactics with technological countermeasures. It wasn't a complete solution, but it was a start. As the working group dispersed for the night, Morgan finally allowed himself a moment to process the news about Michael. His son was conscious, improving, asking for him. After years of strained communication and emotional distance, this felt like an opportunity, perhaps their last, to repair what had been broken. In his quarters, Morgan set up the secure video link to Landstuhl Medical Center. As the connection established, he found himself uncharacteristically nervous, unsure what to say or how to bridge the gulf that had grown between them. The screen flickered, then stabilized to show Michael propped up in a hospital bed. He looked pale and drawn, with bandages visible beneath his hospital gown, but his eyes were clear and alert. There was a moment of awkward silence as father and son regarded each other across the digital divide. "Dad," Michael said finally, his voice hoarse but steady. "Mike," Morgan swallowed hard, "how are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a tank instead of being in one." A ghost of a smile crossed Michael's face. "But I'm told I'm improving. Should be back on my feet in a few weeks." Morgan nodded, relieved to see his son's spirit intact. "That's good news. You had us worried." Another pause, heavy with unspoken words. "They tell me you're at FOB Sentinel," Michael said, "working on countermeasures for the drone threat." "That's right. We're making progress. Discovered some interesting things about how they're tracking our movements." Michael's expression turned serious. "My crew, they're okay? Walker, Chen, Rodriguez?" "They're fine. Minor injuries only. They speak very highly of you, by the way. Said you made sure they got out first." Michael looked away, seemingly embarrassed by the praise. "Just doing my job." "No," Morgan said firmly. "You went above and beyond. You saved Walker's life at risk to your own. That's not just doing your job. That's exemplary leadership." Their eyes met again, and Morgan saw something shift in his son's expression. A tentative openness, a lowering of the defensive walls that had stood between them for so long. "I learned from the best," Michael said quietly. The simple statement hit Morgan with unexpected force. Despite the years of distance, despite the missed birthdays and school events, despite the arguments and misunderstandings, his son still saw something in him worth emulating. "Mike, Morgan hesitated, unused to expressing his deeper feelings. "I'm proud of you, not just for your actions in combat, but for the officer and man you've become." Michael's eyes glistened suspiciously. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot." They talked for another 20 minutes about Michael's recovery, about Morgan's findings at Phobie Sentinel, about the mysterious tracking devices and suspected technology theft. It wasn't the emotional reconciliation of movie dramas, but it was a beginning, a tentative reconnection between two men who had more in common than either had been willing to acknowledge. As they prepared to end the call, Michael said, "Dad, when this is over, when I'm recovered and you're back from deployment, maybe we could go fishing at Lake Travis, like we used to when I was a kid." Morgan felt an unexpected tightness in his throat. "I'd like that, Mike. I'd like that very much." After the call ended, Morgan sat in silence for a long moment, processing the conversation. For the first time in years, he felt a cautious hope for his relationship with his son. The barriers weren't gone, but they had begun to crack. His reflection was interrupted by a sharp knock on his door. It was Martinez, his expression urgent. "Steele, we need you at the TOC, now." "What's happened?" "Reynolds has made a breakthrough with the tracking device, and it's not good news." Minutes later, Morgan was in the secure technical area where Reynolds had been analyzing the mysterious devices. She looked up as he entered, her face pale with concern. "Colonel, I've identified the source signature in these tracking devices. They're not just using American technology, they're using a very specific subset of classified systems developed by Quantum Dynamics." "The defense contractor?" Morgan asked. "What's the significance?" Reynolds hesitated. "Quantum Dynamics has been the lead contractor on several classified drone development programs, including systems specifically designed to counter armored vehicles." She paused. "And their chief technical officer is Dr. James Collins." Morgan frowned. "Should I know that name?" "Probably not. But you should know that Major Sarah Reynolds was previously Dr. Sarah Reynolds, senior research scientist at Quantum Dynamics, working directly under Dr. Collins on those same drone programs." Morgan stared at her, the implications sinking in. "You worked for the company that developed the technology now being used against us?" "Yes," Reynolds admitted. "That's why UCOM wanted me on this mission. I know these systems intimately. I helped design some of them." "And you're just revealing this now?" Morgan's voice was dangerously quiet. "I was under orders not to disclose my background until I had confirmation of Quantum Dynamics' involvement." Reynolds met his gaze steadily. "Now I have that confirmation. And it gets worse. The programming architecture in these devices has James Collins's signature all over it. This isn't just stolen technology. It's being actively developed and updated by someone with intimate knowledge of the original systems." Morgan exchanged glances with Martinez, who had entered behind him. "You're saying Collins is the leak?" "I'm saying it's a strong possibility. He has the knowledge, the access, and potentially the motivation. He was passed over for promotion last year and has been increasingly vocal about what he sees as the military's misuse of his technology." "Have you reported this to UCOM?" "Not yet. I wanted to brief you first, given your leadership role in developing countermeasures." Morgan considered this information carefully. If Reynolds was right, they were facing a betrayal at the highest levels of America's defense technology sector. A betrayal that had already cost lives and threatened the security of U.S. forces worldwide. But something didn't fit. Collins might have the technical knowledge to provide the enemy with drone systems and tracking devices, but how would he know operational details? How would the enemy know exactly when and where to strike? Unless, Morgan's eyes narrowed as he studied Reynolds. "Major, who else at Quantum Dynamics would have access to these systems? And who in the military chain of command would have both technical knowledge and operational information?" Reynolds frowned. "Several senior engineers would have technical access, but none with Collins's comprehensive understanding. As for military personnel," she paused, "UCOM maintains a technical liaison office at Quantum Dynamics. They would have access to both technical specifications and operational planning." "Names?" "Colonel Andrew Hayes is the senior military liaison. He oversees all classified technology transfers between Quantum Dynamics and deployed units." Morgan didn't recognize the name, But that meant little in the vast military bureaucracy. What mattered was that they now had a potential lead, a connection between the technical breach and the operational intelligence the enemy seemed to possess. We need to report this to EUCOM immediately, Morgan decided, but we also need to proceed carefully. If Collins or Hayes are involved, they may have means of monitoring communications. Reynolds nodded her understanding. I can prepare a secure transmission using protocols that weren't part of the systems potentially compromised. Do it. And Martinez, I want you to continue the vehicle inspections. If there are more of these devices, we need to find them all. As the others moved to execute his orders, Morgan remained behind, examining one of the tracking devices. Its sophisticated design and seamless integration with American military systems represented a level of betrayal that was hard to comprehend. Someone with access to the nation's most advanced defense technology had chosen to provide it to an adversary, an act that had directly led to the wounding of his son and the deaths of other American soldiers. The personal and professional aspects of this mission had just merged in a way Morgan had never anticipated. Finding the source of this betrayal wasn't just about national security anymore. It was about justice for Michael and every other soldier who had faced an enemy armed with their own country's technology. And it was about ensuring that no other father would have to see his son wounded by weapons that never should have been in enemy hands. With renewed determination, Morgan set aside his personal feelings and focused on the immediate task, developing effective countermeasures against the drone threat. They now understood more about what they were facing, but time was critical. Enemy forces continued to adapt and evolve their tactics, and American lives hung in the balance. The technological betrayal was a problem for counterintelligence specialists. Morgan's problem was keeping his soldiers alive while they fulfilled their mission. And for that, he needed to combine the cutting-edge expertise of people like Reynolds with the time-tested wisdom of traditional armored warfare. It was a challenge unlike any he had faced in his long military career. But as he had told the young recruits at Fort Hood, the essence of armored warfare wasn't about the technology. It was about adaptation, innovation, and the human element that no drone or algorithm could replicate. That was what the enemy, for all their sophisticated technology, failed to understand. And that would be their downfall. Dawn broke over Forward Operating Base Sentinel with a cold, gray light that seemed to mirror the mood of its occupants. Colonel Richard Morgan stood at the perimeter fence, watching as armored vehicles maneuvered in the staging area, their engines growling in the early morning stillness. Each had been thoroughly inspected, purged of tracking devices, and modified according to the plan he had developed with Martinez and Reynolds. Today would be the test of that plan. After weeks of defensive operations, of watching American tanks and soldiers fall victim to the mysterious drone swarms, they were finally taking the initiative. A risky operation, but necessary, not just to accomplish their tactical objectives, but to restore the confidence of soldiers who had begun to feel like helpless targets in a shooting gallery. Final inspections complete, Sergeant Major Martinez reported, appearing at Morgan's side. All vehicles are ready. Morgan nodded. And the electronic countermeasures? Major Reynolds has personally verified each system. If these modifications work the way she believes they will, the enemy drones should have difficulty targeting our vulnerabilities. The plan was multi-layered, combining old-school tactics with cutting-edge electronic warfare. Based on Reynolds' analysis of the captured tracking devices, they had developed jammers that disrupted the specific frequencies used by enemy drone systems. The tanks had been fitted with modified reactive armor over their most vulnerable points. Smoke dispensers had been reconfigured to release particulates that confused both thermal and visual sensors. And most importantly, they had developed a deception plan that would, if successful, turn the enemy's surveillance advantage against them. Any word from EUCOM on the intelligence investigation? Morgan asked quietly. Martinez shook his head. Nothing concrete. They've questioned Collins and several other quantum dynamics personnel, but no arrests yet. Hayes has been temporarily reassigned, allegedly for a security review. Morgan frowned. The counterintelligence investigation was proceeding too slowly for his liking. While Pentagon analysts pored over data and conducted interviews, soldiers continued to face an enemy armed with stolen American technology. It was why today's operation was so critical. They needed to demonstrate that they could counter the drone threat effectively, even without identifying the source of the security breach. Colonel Morgan, a voice called from behind them. It was Captain Peterson, tablet in hand. Final briefing in 15 minutes. And there's a secure call for you from Landstuhl. Morgan felt a surge of anticipation. Michael, I'll take it in the communications center. The secure video connection took a moment to establish. But when it did, Morgan was rewarded with the sight of his son sitting up in his hospital bed, looking considerably better than during their last call. The color had returned to his face, and though he was still connected to monitoring equipment, he appeared alert and stronger. Dad, Michael greeted him with a small smile. Heard you're shaking things up at Sentinel. Word travels fast, Morgan replied, unable to suppress a matching smile. How are you feeling? Better every day. Doctors say I might be transferred to Walter Reed next week. From there, it's rehab, and then... He hesitated. Well, we'll see. Morgan caught the uncertainty in his son's voice. Combat injuries, especially serious ones, often force soldiers to reconsider their career paths. For a tank officer like Michael, a return to full duty was possible but not guaranteed. One step at a time, Morgan advised. Focus on healing first. Michael nodded, then his expression grew more serious. I heard about the operation today. The tank crews are calling it Morgan's Gambit. That's overstating things, Morgan demurred. It's a coordinated effort developed by the entire team. But it's your strategy, your leadership. Michael paused. They trust you, Dad. After weeks of feeling like sitting ducks, you've given them hope. That matters more than you know. The simple words carried unexpected weight. Morgan had spent his career focusing on tactical problems, on the mechanics of combat, sometimes forgetting the profound impact leadership had on morale, on the spirits of young men and women facing danger and uncertainty. I appreciate that, Mike, but trust has to be earned in results, not just plans. You'll get those results, Michael said with surprising conviction. I've seen how you work. When you set your mind to something, failure isn't an option. The confidence in his son's voice touched Morgan deeply. After years of strain between them, this expression of faith felt like a precious gift. I should go, Morgan said, checking his watch. Briefing's about to start. Dad, Michael said quickly, as if afraid he might not get another chance. Be careful out there. I know you feel responsible for everyone else, but just remember there are people waiting for you to come home too. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Not just a son concerned for his father's safety, but an acknowledgement that their relationship, damaged but not destroyed, was worth preserving and rebuilding. I'll remember, Morgan promised. Take care of yourself, Mike. I'll call again when I can. As the connection ended, Morgan sat motionless for a moment, processing the conversation. Then, with practiced discipline, he compartmentalized his emotions, focusing on the mission ahead. There would be time for personal reflection later, if they survived the day. The briefing room was packed when Morgan arrived. Colonel Harker stood at the front, with the regiment's senior officers and non-commissioned officers filling every available seat. Maps and tactical displays covered the walls, showing the area of operations in minute detail. Gentlemen, Harker began as Morgan took his place. Operation Breaking Point commences in 90 minutes. Colonel Morgan will outline the tactical plan. Morgan moved to the front, surveying the faces before him, some anxious, some determined, all attentive. These men had endured weeks of frustration and loss, watching their comrades fall to an enemy they couldn't effectively engage. Today might change that. Our objective, Morgan began, indicating a position on the map, is to secure and hold this ridgeline, designated Objective Granite. Intelligence suggests the enemy has established forward drone launch sites in this area, allowing them to project their drone swarms deeper into our territory. He outlined the three-phase operation. First, a feint by a mechanized infantry company to draw attention and potentially trigger enemy drone deployments. Second, the main thrust by the armored battalion using the modified vehicles and electronic countermeasures. And finally, a rapid consolidation of the objective, with engineering teams establishing a forward electronic warfare position that could disrupt enemy drone operations across a wide area. The key to this operation is timing and deception, Morgan emphasized. The enemy has become accustomed to our defensive posture. They've adapted their tactics to counter our previous attempts to mitigate the drone threat. Today, we change the equation. He detailed the specific modifications to their vehicles, the electronic countermeasures developed by Reynolds, and the new tactical formations designed to maximize the effectiveness of their defensive systems while maintaining offensive capability. Questions? Morgan asked, concluding his briefing. A young lieutenant raised his hand. Sir, What if the countermeasures don't work? What's our fallback plan? A valid concern, Morgan acknowledged. If we encounter unexpected resistance or the countermeasures prove ineffective, we'll execute a fighting withdrawal to these pre-established rally points. He indicated several positions on the map. But remember this, even if we don't achieve all our objectives today, every engagement provides data, insights that help us refine our approach. The enemy has been learning from each encounter. So have we. As the briefing concluded and the officers dispersed to prepare their units, Harker approached Morgan. Solid plan, Richard. The men needed this. A chance to take the fight to the enemy instead of just reacting. Morgan nodded. Let's hope it works. It will, Reynolds said, joining them. She had been monitoring the electronic warfare preparations from the back of the room. The countermeasures are sound. As long as everyone follows the protocols we've established, we should see a significant reduction in effective enemy drone strikes. Speaking of which, Harker lowered his voice, I received a message from UCOM just before the briefing. They've made progress in the intelligence investigation. They've identified unusual data transfers from quantum dynamics servers to an encrypted external network. The timing corresponds with our operational planning cycles. Collins, Morgan asked. They're not sure yet. The access originated from within the company, but they haven't pinpointed the specific individual. They're accelerating the investigation, but wanted us to know they're making progress. It was something, at least. Morgan had hoped for more definitive news, but intelligence investigations were rarely quick or straightforward, especially when they involved potential high-level betrayal. We proceed as planned, he decided. The tactical problem remains our priority. An hour later, Morgan stood in the turret of a command vehicle, watching as the armored column assembled at the line of departure. The morning had given way to a clear, crisp day, good visibility for operations, but also for enemy observation. Everything would depend on the effectiveness of their countermeasures and the discipline of the unit commanders in executing the plan. Martinez climbed up beside him, binoculars in hand. Just like old times, eh, Steele? Leading from the front. Some habits die hard, Morgan replied with a grim smile. Harker wasn't thrilled with my insistence on accompanying the main force. Can't blame him. You're supposed to be an advisor, not a combat commander. Morgan shrugged. Hard to advise on tactics I haven't personally validated. Besides, I need to see how these countermeasures perform in actual combat conditions. The truth, which he didn't articulate even to Martinez, was more personal. He needed to be there to share the risk with the men implementing his plan. If it failed, if soldiers died because his strategy was flawed, he couldn't bear to receive that news from the safety of a command post. It wasn't just professional pride. It was a moral imperative that had guided his entire military career. First phase initiating, the radio crackled. The mechanized infantry company was moving out, advancing toward a position where they would deliberately expose themselves to enemy observation, drawing attention away from the main armored thrust. Good hunting, Morgan responded. Maintain discipline and remember your training. For the next 20 minutes, they waited tensely as the infantry company executed their feint. Reports filtered in of initial contact, enemy reconnaissance drones observing their movement, followed by the first signs of drone swarms mobilizing in response. Phase 1 successful, Martinez noted as they monitored the tactical display. Enemy drones are focusing on the infantry company. And our countermeasures? Effective so far, infantry reports 2 attempted drone strikes, both defeated by the new electronic jammers. It was the signal they had been waiting for. Morgan raised his hand, then dropped it sharply. Execute Phase 2. The armored column lurched forward, 30 tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles advancing in a modified wedge formation that maximized mutual support while presenting minimal vulnerability to aerial observation. They moved quickly, using terrain features for concealment where possible, maintaining strict emissions control except for the specialized jamming systems designed to confuse enemy targeting. For the first 3 kilometers, they encountered no resistance, exactly as planned. The enemy's attention was fixed on the infantry company conducting the feint. By the time their sensors detected the main armored thrust, it would be too late to reposition their drone swarms effectively. Or so Morgan hoped. Contact, the radio crackled. Drone activity at bearing 045, range 2 kilometers and closing. Morgan tensed, raising his binoculars. In the distance, he could just make out the tiny specks moving against the blue sky, reconnaissance drones, the first wave of the enemy's defense. Maintain course and speed, he ordered. Electronic countermeasures active. The column continued its advance as the reconnaissance drones circled overhead. Unlike previous encounters, they maintained distance, as if confused or uncertain about what they were observing. The modified reactive armor and thermal disrupting panels were working, obscuring the vehicle's heat signatures and breaking up their visual profiles. They see us, Martinez observed, but they're not sure what they're seeing. The disguise is working. The deception was a key component of Morgan's plan. Rather than trying to hide from the drones, nearly impossible given their sophisticated sensors, they had modified their vehicles to mimic the electronic and thermal signatures of less valuable targets. The tanks, normally priority targets for drone strikes, now appeared to enemy sensors as support vehicles, while the actual support vehicles had been enhanced to present stronger signatures, drawing attention away from the critical combat elements. First objective in sight, reported the lead tank commander. No sign of enemy ground forces. Proceed with caution, Morgan instructed. They may be waiting for us to commit before revealing their positions. The column approached the first phase line, a shallow valley that offered some cover from aerial observation, but could also conceal enemy ambush positions. Morgan scanned the terrain carefully, searching for any signs of threat. Movement, right flank, Martinez warned suddenly. Ground vehicles, possibly their autonomous weapons. Morgan shifted his binoculars, catching sight of several small vehicles moving rapidly through the underbrush, paralleling their advance. All units be advised. Autonomous ground weapons on right flank. Maintain formation and prepare for close-in defense. This was the moment of truth. If the enemy ground weapons could penetrate their formation, the entire operation might be compromised. But Morgan had anticipated this threat. The outer vehicles in the formation had been specially equipped with enhanced detection systems and close-in defensive weapons, designed specifically to counter the autonomous ground threats. Engaging, reported one of the Bradley commanders. The fighting vehicle's turret swiveled, its 25mm chain gun chattering as it tracked and fired on the approaching ground weapons. Several exploded in fiery blossoms, while others veered away, seeking alternative approaches. They're probing our defenses, Morgan observed, testing for weaknesses before committing their main drone swarms. The column pushed forward, maintaining momentum while repelling the ground attacks. So far, the plan was working. The enemy seemed confused by their modified signatures and formations, unable to effectively target their most valuable assets. Then, as they crested a small rise and the main objective came into view, the situation changed dramatically. Multiple drone launches detected, Reynolds reported from her position in the electronic warfare vehicle. Large swarms approaching from bearings 030 and 90. This was the critical moment. The enemy, realizing their ground weapons had failed to halt the advance, was committing their primary weapon, the drone swarms that had proven so devastatingly effective in previous engagements. All units, execute thunderclap, Morgan ordered. It was the code name for their primary countermeasure, a coordinated deployment of smoke, electronic jamming, and defensive fire designed to disrupt the drone swarm's coordination and targeting capabilities. Smoke generators on each vehicle activated simultaneously, creating a dense, particulate-laden cloud that obscured visual and thermal signatures. Specialized jammers broadcast interference across the frequencies used by the drone swarms for coordination, and the vehicle's defensive weapons systems tracked and engaged any drones that penetrated the perimeter. Through his binoculars, Morgan watched as the approaching drone swarms encountered their defensive screen. Many seemed to hesitate, their programmed flight patterns disrupted by the electronic interference. Others pressed forward, only to become disoriented in the smoke cloud. A few managed to penetrate all defenses, diving toward specific vehicles. But now, instead of striking with devastating accuracy at known vulnerabilities, they either missed completely or detonated against the enhanced reactive armor panels, causing minimal damage. It's working, Martinez said, unable to keep the surprise from his voice. They can't coordinate effectively. Morgan allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The countermeasures, developed through careful analysis of enemy capabilities and vulnerabilities, were proving effective. But he knew better than to celebrate prematurely. This was just the beginning, and the enemy had demonstrated remarkable adaptability in previous engagements. Maintain discipline, he reminded the unit commanders. Press the advance to objective granite. The armored column pushed forward through the chaos of smoke, electronic warfare, and drone attacks. Occasional explosions marked where enemy drones managed to strike their targets. But unlike previous engagements, these hits were scattered and ineffective, causing minimal damage and no casualties. As they approached the final phase line, the resistance intensified. The enemy, realizing their drone swarms were ineffective, shifted tactics, bringing indirect fire to bear on the advancing column. Artillery shells began to fall, impacting around the vehicles with thunderous concussions. They're firing blind, Morgan noted. The drones can't provide accurate targeting data, so they're saturating the area. It was further confirmation that their countermeasures were working, but the artillery, even firing blind, posed a significant threat. A direct hit could disable even the most heavily armored vehicle. All units execute dispersal pattern Delta, Morgan ordered. Maintain advance, but increase intervals. The column responded, spreading out to reduce vulnerability to artillery while continuing the advance toward objective Granite. The artillery fire became more sporadic as they closed on the objective. The enemy, unable to effectively target the advancing force, was conserving ammunition. Objective Granite in sight, reported the lead tank commander. No visible enemy presence on the ridgeline. Morgan studied the objective through his binoculars. The ridgeline appeared undefended, but he knew appearances could be deceiving. Proceed with caution. Reconnoiter before committing the main force. Two reconnaissance vehicles moved forward, scanning the ridgeline for signs of threat. They reported negative contact, no enemy forces, no defensive positions, no evidence of recent occupation. It doesn't make sense, Martinez muttered. Intelligence indicated this was a forward drone launch site. Where are the facilities? The personnel? Morgan shared his concern. Something wasn't right. The enemy had committed significant drone and artillery assets to defend this position, yet there was no evidence of the infrastructure they had expected to find. All units, hold position, he ordered. Engineering team, conduct thorough sweep of the objective area. Look for underground facilities, concealed entrances, anything that might indicate the presence of a drone launch site. As the engineers advanced cautiously onto the ridgeline, Morgan considered the possibilities. Had intelligence been wrong? Was this a deception, drawing them away from the actual drone launch sites? Or was there something they were missing? Some aspect of the enemy's operations they hadn't understood. Colonel, one of the engineers called over the radio, we found something. Eastern slope of the ridgeline, concealed entrances to what appears to be an underground facility. Morgan directed his vehicle toward the reported location. As they approached, he could see where the engineers had uncovered a series of camouflaged entrances built into the hillside. Heavy steel doors designed to blend perfectly with the surrounding terrain. Can you get them open? He asked as he dismounted, approaching the lead engineer. Working on it, sir. They're secured with electronic locks, but we might be able to bypass them. While the engineers worked, Morgan surveyed the area. The facility was well designed for concealment, virtually invisible from the air or from distance. Only close inspection revealed its presence. No wonder intelligence hadn't provided more specific details. Even advanced surveillance would have had difficulty identifying this site. I've got it, the engineer announced after several tense minutes. One of the heavy doors swung open, revealing a darkened passageway leading underground. Morgan turned to Martinez. Secure the perimeter. I want a full defensive posture established while we investigate the facility. And alert Colonel Harker that we've secured the objective and discovered an underground installation. With a small security team, Morgan entered the facility, flashlights illuminating the narrow corridor that descended into the earth. The air was cool and stale, suggesting limited ventilation. The walls were lined with power conduits and communication cables, a sophisticated installation, not a hastily established forward base. The corridor opened into a larger chamber that immediately confirmed their suspicions. It was a drone operations center with control stations, maintenance areas, and launch tubes that presumably opened to the surface through concealed ports. But what caught Morgan's attention was the technology, sleek, modern equipment that bore unmistakable similarities to American designs. This isn't just using stolen American technology, he observed grimly. This entire facility could have been built by Quantum Dynamics. Reynolds, who had joined the exploration team, moved to examine one of the control stations. These are definitely our systems, or versions of them. The interface design, the control architecture, it's all based on the classified drone programs I worked on. Morgan felt a cold anger settling in his chest. The evidence of betrayal was now undeniable. physical and concrete. American soldiers had died because someone had provided the enemy with this technology, this capability. "What else can you tell me about this facility?" he asked Reynolds. She continued her examination, moving from station to station. "It's a forward operations center for their drone program. From here, they could control swarms operating across a significant area. The launch tubes would allow them to deploy drones directly from the facility without visible launch signatures that might give away their position. And the range? How far could they project force from here?" Reynolds studied a map display on one of the consoles. "Based on this, they could cover our entire area of operations from this single facility, and there are indications of at least 2 other similar installations in the region." It explained how the enemy had been able to respond so quickly to American movements, how their drone swarms always seemed to be available precisely when and where they were needed. With multiple concealed facilities like this one, they could maintain continuous coverage across the battlefield. "Download everything," Morgan instructed. "I want complete data from all these systems, operational records, communication logs, anything that might help identify the source of the technology transfer." As Reynolds and the technical team began extracting data from the facility's computers, Morgan explored further, moving deeper into the complex. He discovered additional chambers, living quarters, supply storage, even a small medical facility. This wasn't just a forward operating base, it was designed for extended self-sufficient operations. In what appeared to be an administrative office, Morgan found something unexpected. Personnel records, including photographs of the facility's operators. He studied them carefully, looking for any familiar faces, any indication of who might be responsible for the technology transfer. Nothing immediately stood out, but he collected the materials anyway. Intelligence analysts might recognize connections he missed. "Colonel," Martinez called from the main chamber, "Reynolds has found something you need to see." Morgan returned to find Reynolds at a central control station, her expression grave. "I've accessed their operational logs. They include detailed information about American unit movements, patrol schedules, even maintenance rotations. The level of detail is troubling." Morgan examined the display. The information was comprehensive, far beyond what might be obtained through conventional intelligence gathering or electronic surveillance. This was insider knowledge, specific, detailed, and deadly. "Can you determine the source?" he asked. Reynolds hesitated. "Not definitively, but there are transmission records showing regular data transfers from an external source. The encryption protocols match those used by EUCOM for secure communications." The implication was clear and disturbing. The breach wasn't just at quantum dynamics, it extended into the military command structure itself. Someone with access to operational planning at the highest levels was feeding information directly to this facility. "Copy everything," Morgan ordered. "This goes to EUCOM immediately." As the data extraction continued, Morgan received a radio call from the perimeter security team. "Colonel, we've got movement to the northeast. Multiple vehicles approaching, approximately 5 kilometers out." Morgan moved quickly to the surface, climbing to a vantage point where he could observe the approaching threat. Through his binoculars, he could make out a column of enemy vehicles, infantry fighting vehicles escorting what appeared to be larger transport trucks. "They're coming to evacuate the facility," he realized. "They know we've compromised it." The timing suggested the enemy had been alerted to their operation, perhaps by the same source that had been providing the detailed intelligence found in the facility's computers. The betrayal was ongoing, active, and immediate. "All units, prepare for defensive operations," Morgan ordered. "Enemy column approaching from the northeast, estimated strength company-sized element. They appear to be attempting to reach the facility." He quickly assessed their situation. The armored force had secured the ridgeline and established defensive positions, but they were still recovering from the advance, with vehicles refueling and crews conducting maintenance. They could repel the approaching force, but it would come at a cost. More importantly, if they engaged in a prolonged battle here, it might compromise the intelligence gathering operation inside the facility. The data Reynolds was extracting could be crucial to identifying the source of the betrayal and preventing further technology transfers. Morgan made his decision. "Martinez, organize a rear guard action. I want enough force to delay the enemy approach, but not a full engagement. Reynolds needs time to complete the data extraction, then we withdraw with the intelligence." "You're not going to defend the facility?" Martinez asked, surprised. "The facility itself isn't the objective anymore," Morgan explained. "It's what we can learn from it. Once we have that data, this place has limited strategic value. We'll destroy it before withdrawal to deny them the equipment, but I won't risk unnecessary casualties to hold ground we don't need. It was the kind of clear-eyed tactical decision that had characterized Morgan's career. Pragmatic, focused on the mission's true objectives rather than symbolic victories or territory for its own sake. While Martinez organized the defensive action, Morgan returned to the facility to check on Reynolds' progress. "How much longer?" he asked. 10 minutes, maybe 15, she replied, fingers flying across the keyboard. "There's more here than I anticipated. Detailed records of operations, technical specifications for their drone systems, even what appears to be development plans for future capabilities." "Make it 5 minutes," Morgan said firmly. "Enemy forces are approaching, and I've ordered a fighting withdrawal once we have what we need." Reynolds nodded, understanding the urgency. "I'll focus on the most critical data." Outside, the sound of distant firing indicated that the rear guard had engaged the approaching enemy column. The defensive force, using the favorable terrain of the ridgeline, was effectively delaying the enemy advance, but Morgan knew it wouldn't hold them indefinitely. "Data extraction complete," Reynolds announced 4 minutes later, securing a set of storage devices containing the downloaded information. "I've got everything we need." "Good work," Morgan acknowledged. "Now for phase 2. He turned to the engineering team that had accompanied them. "Set demolition charges throughout the facility. I want this place completely unusable when we're done." While the engineers placed explosives at key structural points and equipment locations, Morgan organized the withdrawal. The armored force would fall back in phases, maintaining a defensive screen while the technical team and their valuable intelligence were evacuated first. "Charges set," the lead engineer reported. "Detonation on your command." Morgan took a final look around the facility that had caused so much death and destruction. The stolen American technology, the betrayal it represented, the lives lost because of it, all of it fueled a cold, focused anger that he channeled into his determination to complete the mission successfully. "Everyone out," he ordered. "Prepare for immediate withdrawal." Once all personnel had evacuated the underground facility, Morgan gave the command to detonate the charges. The explosion was substantial, causing the ground to shudder beneath their feet. Smoke and debris billowed from the concealed entrances, and portions of the ridgeline itself collapsed, burying parts of the facility under tons of earth and rock. "Begin withdrawal," Morgan ordered. "Rear guard, maintain contact but disengage progressively. All other units fall back to Rally Point Charlie." The armored force executed a textbook fighting withdrawal, maintaining cohesion while steadily disengaging from the enemy. The rear guard, using the advantages of prepared positions and superior gunnery, kept the enemy force at bay while the main body of the column retreated with the valuable intelligence they had gathered. By nightfall, the entire force had returned to forward operating base Sentinel. The operation, while not unfolding exactly as planned, had achieved its primary objectives. They had successfully tested their drone countermeasures, discovered and destroyed a key enemy facility, and most importantly, acquired intelligence that might finally expose the source of the technology transfer and operational leaks. In the base's secure communications center, Morgan, Reynolds, and Harker prepared to transmit their findings to EUCOM. The data Reynolds had extracted was comprehensive, potentially providing the missing links in the counterintelligence investigation. "This should give them what they need," Reynolds said as she organized the data for transmission. "The operational logs clearly show regular intelligence transfers from a source using EUCOM communication protocols. And the technical specifications of their drone systems are definitively derived from quantum dynamics designs, specifically programs I worked on directly." "Can they trace the source?" Harker asked. "With this data, they should be able to. The transmission signatures include unique identifiers that can be matched against authorized users of the secure communication system." Morgan watched as Reynolds prepared the transmission, a sense of impending resolution mingling with lingering concern. They had struck a significant blow today, but the betrayal might run deeper than they yet understood. Until the source was definitively identified and neutralized, American forces remained vulnerable. The secure transmission complete, they could only wait for EUCOM's response. Morgan retreated to his quarters, physically and mentally exhausted after the day's operations. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel a measure of accomplishment. The countermeasures had worked. They had demonstrated that the drone threat, while serious, was not insurmountable. American ingenuity and adaptability had once again proven equal to the challenge. He was about to rest when Martinez knocked on his door. "EUCOM is responding to our transmission. They want us in the secure communications center immediately. Minutes later, they faced the grim visage of General Westmoreland, UCOM's commanding officer, on the secure video link. Colonel Morgan, your intelligence find is significant, Westmoreland began without preamble. Based on the data you've provided, we've identified the likely source of the operational leaks. Morgan tensed, prepared for confirmation of his suspicions about Hayes or possibly even Reynolds herself. Colonel Andrew Hayes has been placed under arrest, Westmoreland confirmed, but he appears to be only part of a larger conspiracy. The technical data transfers from quantum dynamics didn't originate with Dr. Collins, as initially suspected, but from another source within the company. The general paused, his expression grave. Major Reynolds, are you familiar with Dr. Elizabeth Harrington? Reynolds paled visibly. Yes, sir. She was my direct supervisor at Quantum Dynamics before Dr. Collins. She left the company about a year ago, supposedly for a position with a European defense contractor. She didn't leave, Westmoreland corrected. She was terminated after security concerns were raised about her access to classified projects. She disappeared shortly afterward. We now believe she established contact with enemy intelligence services and began providing them with technical data and designs. Morgan processed this information. And Hayes, how does he fit into this? Hayes and Harrington had a relationship outside of professional channels. After she disappeared, they maintained contact. He began providing operational details that complemented the technical data she had stolen. It was a devastating breach. Technical specifications from Harrington, operational intelligence from Hayes, combining to create the deadly threat they had been facing. Have you apprehended Harrington? Morgan asked. Westmoreland shook his head. Not yet. We believe she's operating from within enemy territory now, possibly directly overseeing the implementation of the stolen technology. Hayes is cooperating, providing details of their communication methods, but he claims not to know her exact location. The news was both encouraging and concerning. They had identified the source of the betrayal, but Harrington remained at large, potentially continuing to refine and enhance the enemy's drone capabilities based on her intimate knowledge of American systems. What about the countermeasures? Morgan asked. The data from today's operation confirms they're effective, but if Harrington is actively working with the enemy, she may be able to develop adaptations. That's why your mission remains critical, Colonel, Westmoreland replied. The countermeasures you've developed need to be continuously refined and updated. This isn't over. It's just entering a new phase. After the communication ended, Morgan sat in thoughtful silence. They had achieved a significant victory today, but as Westmoreland had emphasized, it was just one battle in an ongoing war. The enemy would adapt to their countermeasures, especially with someone like Harrington providing technical expertise. They would need to remain vigilant, innovative, and adaptable. Your thoughts, Major? He asked Reynolds, who had been unusually quiet during the briefing. She looked troubled. I worked closely with Dr. Harrington for 3 years. I never suspected. She was brilliant, dedicated. I can't reconcile the person I knew with someone who would betray her country this way. People's motivations are complex, Morgan observed. Money, ideology, compromise, ego, the traditional drivers of espionage. Did she exhibit any warning signs? Reynolds considered this. She was intensely competitive, frustrated when her ideas were passed over. And when Collins was promoted above her, she became bitter, convinced she'd been overlooked because of gender bias. She paused. But to go from professional disappointment to treason, it's a massive leap. Not if she convinced herself she was right and everyone else was wrong, Morgan suggested. I've seen it before. People who believe they're the hero of their own story, even as they betray everything they once stood for. The conversation was interrupted by a call from the medical center. Colonel Morgan, we have an incoming transmission from Landstuhl. Your son is being evacuated to Walter Reed. He asked to speak with you before transport. Morgan excused himself, hurrying to the communications center. The secure video link showed Michael in a wheelchair, surrounded by medical personnel preparing him for transport. Dad, Michael greeted him, looking stronger than in their previous call. Heard your operation was a success. Word travels fast, Morgan observed with a small smile. How are you feeling? Good enough for them to ship me stateside. Doctors say I'll make a full recovery, though it'll take time. He hesitated. They're less certain about my future in tanks. The unspoken question hung between them. For a career tank officer, being medically disqualified from command positions would mean a significant change in career trajectory. There are many ways to serve, Morgan said gently. Your experience, your knowledge. Those are valuable assets, regardless of your medical status. Michael nodded, absorbing this. I've been thinking a lot, Dad, about what's important, about what comes next. He paused. When you get home, that fishing trip we talked about, I'd still like to do that. So would I, Morgan replied, surprised by the emotion welling in his chest. It's a date. After the call ended, Morgan remained in the communications center, reflecting on everything that had transpired since he'd received that first call about Michael's injury. What had begun as a personal mission to reach his wounded son had evolved into a complex operation involving national security, technological betrayal, and ultimately, the beginning of reconciliation between father and son. He was still deep in thought when Martinez found him. Colonel Harker is assembling the staff. UCOM has new orders based on the intelligence we gathered. In the Tactical Operations Center, Harker outlined their new mission. Based on the data extracted from the drone facility, intelligence has identified 2 additional installations in our area of operations. UCOM wants them neutralized before Dr. Harrington can adapt their systems to counter our countermeasures. It would be challenging operations, Morgan knew. The enemy, now aware that their drone facilities were vulnerable, would strengthen defenses, perhaps relocate key assets. But with the countermeasures proven effective and the source of the intelligence leaks identified, they had advantages they hadn't possessed before. I'll begin planning immediately, Morgan offered. We'll need to modify our approach for each target, assuming they'll anticipate our tactics based on today's operation. Harker nodded. I've been authorized to extend your advisory role indefinitely. UCOM considers your expertise in countering these drone threats essential to ongoing operations. It was both a professional compliment and a personal complication. Extended deployment meant more time away from Michael during his recovery. Yet Morgan knew his work here was vital. Other soldiers' lives depended on the countermeasures and tactics he was developing. Thank you, sir. I'll continue as long as needed. As the meeting concluded and the staff dispersed to begin planning the new operations, Morgan found himself momentarily alone with Reynolds. She had been subdued since learning of Harrington's betrayal, processing the revelation that someone she had worked with, respected, was responsible for the technology transfer that had caused so much death and destruction. You know her methods, her thinking, Morgan observed. That knowledge will be invaluable as we refine our countermeasures. Reynolds nodded slowly. I keep thinking about the systems we developed together, trying to identify vulnerabilities she might have built in, adaptations she might implement. It feels like a betrayal of my own work, but it's necessary, Morgan finished for her. This is the reality of what we're facing. Your intimate knowledge of these systems and of Harrington herself may be our greatest advantage. She straightened, finding a resolve. You're right. I'll begin a comprehensive analysis immediately, focusing on potential adaptations she might implement based on today's engagement. As Reynolds departed, Martinez approached. You've made quite an impression, Steele. The men are calling you the drone killer now. Morgan shook his head at the nickname. One successful operation doesn't win a war. No, but it gives men hope, confidence. After weeks of feeling helpless against these drone swarms, you've shown them the enemy can be beaten. That matters. It did matter, Morgan acknowledged silently. Morale was as critical as technology or tactics. Soldiers who believed they could win fought differently than those who expected defeat. What about you? Martinez asked. Extended deployment means postponing that reunion with Michael. Morgan sighed. He understands duty better than most. Like father, like son, Martinez observed with a knowing smile. The phrase resonated more deeply than Morgan expected. Throughout his career, he had struggled to balance his professional obligations with his family responsibilities, often prioritizing the former at the expense of the latter. It had cost him precious time with Eleanor and created distance between him and Michael that they were only now beginning to bridge. Yet Michael had followed in his footsteps anyway, choosing the same path, the same branch, even commanding tanks as Morgan had done. And in combat, he had demonstrated the same selfless leadership, ensuring his crew's safety before his own. The Morgan family way. Perhaps there was more of a legacy there than he had realized, not just in the profession they shared, but in the values that defined how they approached it. We'll get there, Morgan said finally. Finish this mission, then focus on what comes next. As night fell over Forward Operating Base Sentinel, Morgan stood once more at the perimeter fence, watching as maintenance crews worked on the tanks and fighting vehicles that had returned from the day's operation. The vehicles bore the scars of combat, impact marks from drone strikes that had been defeated by the modified armor, smoke stains from the countermeasures deployed during the advance. But they were still operational, their crews alive and preparing for the next mission. The countermeasures had worked. The tactics had proven effective. For the first time since the enemy had deployed their drone swarms, American forces had demonstrated they could operate successfully against this threat. It wasn't a final victory. The enemy would adapt, especially with someone like Harrington guiding their technological development. The coming operations against the remaining drone facilities would face stronger resistance, new challenges. But Morgan was confident they would prevail, not because of technological superiority or tactical brilliance, but because of the resilience and adaptability of the American soldiers implementing these plans. That was the true legacy he hoped to leave. Not just effective countermeasures against a specific threat, but a mindset, an approach to warfare that emphasized adaptation, innovation, and the human element that no drone or algorithm could replicate. And perhaps, when this mission was complete, he would have the opportunity to build another legacy, one more personal but equally important. A renewed relationship with his son, built on shared experiences and mutual respect, unencumbered by the regrets and missed opportunities of the past. As Morgan turned to walk back toward his quarters, he felt a sense of purpose and clarity that had been missing since Eleanor's death. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but it was clear. Complete the mission, neutralize the threat, then return home to begin the next chapter. Not as Colonel Morgan, the tank commander turned drone warfare expert, but simply as Richard Morgan, a father reconnecting with his son. The desert night was cool, the stars brilliant overhead. Somewhere in that vast expanse of darkness lay the remaining enemy drone facilities, their threat temporarily diminished but not eliminated. And somewhere far to the west, across an ocean and a continent, a wounded tank commander prepared for his journey home, where he would begin his recovery and wait for his father's return. Two warriors, separated by distance but united by blood and shared purpose. The Morgan legacy, forged in steel and tested in fire, continuing into an uncertain but hopeful future.